and that his mother worked at Asu. Normally, that would have meant nothing. Asu is a very well-known and oft-mentioned presence in the Phoenix area. But something went off in my mind when he said that, and I know in hindsight that something was my daily view of my goal board. My ears perked up when he said Asu, and I asked him, "What does your mother do at Asu?" "She's the chief administrative assistant to the development director at the Asu Foundation," he said. "They're in charge of all the fundraising at the university." I really brightened at that point, and I told Jerry about my past work in fundraising at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and how I'd always wanted to do similar work at Asu. He said he'd be delighted to introduce me to his mother and to the development director himself. Within a month, Asu fundraisers were attending my seminar in relationship, and I had realized one of the goals on my board. I honestly believe that if I had not had a goal board up in my bedroom, Jerry's mention of Asu would have gone right past me. And this illustrates something important. We need to advertise our own goals to ourselves. Otherwise, our psychic energy is spread too thin across the spectrum of things that aren't that important to us. 52 Think outside the box. Once I attended a new business proposal presentation by Bob Curther, in which he had his prospective customers all play a little 9-dot game that illustrated to them that the solutions to puzzles are often simple to see if we think in unconventional ways. As people laughed and tore up their puzzles in frustration when Curther showed them the solution, he stood up to make his final point. "We restrict our thinking for no good reason," said Curther. "We do things simply because that's the way we always did them. I want you to know that our commitment in serving your company is to always look outside the box for the most innovative solutions possible to our problems. We'll never do something just because that's the way we have always done it." To many business leaders pitching a lucrative account, this kind of puzzle-solving exercise would simply be considered a clever presentation. But to Bob Curther, it was a symbolic expression of his whole life in business. Once, on a Xerox-sponsored trip in Cancun, Mexico, Bob and Mike spent the day out in treacherous waters on a fishing boat. After coming ashore, they retired to Carlos O'Brien's restaurant for tequila and beer and a period of reflection on their lives in sales thus far. "We knew that as well as we had done, we would never own boats like the one we were just in if we remained at Xerox," said Bob. "We talked about possibilities in the bar, and it wasn't long before we noticed some black t-shirts on the wall with the word infinity on them. Then, for more than 2 hours, Mike and I discussed just what the word infinity meant. Out of that discussion, a dream was born, a dream that took shape in the form of Infinity Communications." Bob Curther and his brother believed that there was one vital area in which Xerox was underperforming, and that was customer service. What if, they asked, a company's commitment to the customer was infinite? Not boxed in, but unlimited in its possibilities for creative service? With that concept as motivation, the two brothers formed Infincom, short for Infinity Communications, in the state of Arizona, and within 10 years they grew from 6 employees and no customers into a $50 million business with more than 500 employees. And for the past 3 years straight, the Arizona Business Gazette has ranked Infincom the #1 office equipment company in Arizona, ahead of Xerox. All of us tend to look at our challenges from inside a box. We take what we've done in the past and put it in front of our eyes and then try to envision what we call the future. But that restricts our future. With that restricted view, the best the future can be is a new and better past. Great motivational energy occurs when we get out of the box and assume that the possibilities for creative ideas are infinite. To realize the best possible future for yourself, don't look at it through a box containing your own past. 53 Keep thinking. Motivation comes from thought. Every act we take is preceded by a thought that inspires that act. And when we quit thinking, we lose the motivation to act. We eventually slip into pessimism, and the pessimism leads to even less thinking. And so it goes. A downward spiral of negativity and passivity, feeding on itself like cancer. I like to use this example in my seminars to illustrate the power of continuing to think, Let's say a pessimist has made up his mind to clean his garage on a Saturday morning. He wakes up and walks out to the garage and opens the door and is shocked to see just how much of a mess it is. "Forget this," the pessimist says with disgust. "No one could clean this garage in one day." And at that point the pessimist slams the garage door shut and goes back inside to do something else. Pessimists are all or nothing thinkers. They think in catastrophic absolutes. They are either going to do something perfectly or not at all. Now let's look at how the optimist would face the same problem. He wakes up on the same morning and goes to the same garage and sees the same mess and even utters the same first words to himself: "Forget this. No one could clean this garage in one day." But this is where the key difference between an optimist and a pessimist shows itself. Instead of going back into the house, the optimist keeps thinking. "Okay, so I can't clean the whole garage," he says. "What could I do that would make a difference?" He looks for a while, and thinks things over. Finally it occurs to him that he could break the garage down into 4 sections and do just one section today. "For sure I'll do one today," he says, "and even if I only do one section each Saturday, I'll have the whole garage in great shape before the month is over." A month later, you see a pessimist with a filthy garage and an optimist with a clean garage. There was a woman in one of my seminars in Las Vegas who told me that this one concept, the optimist's habit of looking for partial solutions, had made an interesting difference in her life. "I used to come home from work and look at my kitchen and just throw up my hands and curse at it and do nothing at all," she told me. "I'd think the exact same thing as the pessimist in your garage story. Then I decided to just pick a small part of the kitchen and do that, and that area only. It might be a certain counter, or just the sink. By doing just one small part each night I never resent the work, it's never overwhelming, and my kitchen always looks decent." Pessimists like to set their problems aside. They think so negatively about doing the whole thing perfectly that they end up doing nothing at all. The optimist always does a little something. She or he always takes an action and always feels like progress is being made. Because pessimists have a habit of thinking it's hopeless or nothing can be done, they quit thinking too soon. An optimist may have the same initial negative feelings about a project, but he or she keeps thinking until smaller possibilities open up. This is why Alan Loy McGuinness, in his inspiring book The Power of Optimism, refers to optimists as tough-minded. The pessimist, as far as the use of the human mind goes, is a quitter. "Recent studies show," says McGuinness, "that optimists excel in school, have better health, make more money, establish long and happy marriages, stay connected to their children and perhaps even live longer." To witness one of the most profound illustrations of the practical effectiveness of optimism in American history, you'll want to rent the movie, Apollo 13. Although the job of bringing those astronauts back from the far side of the moon looked daunting and overwhelming, the job was accomplished one small task at a time. The people at Mission Control in Houston who saved the astronauts' lives did so because even in the face of impossible technological breakdowns, they kept on thinking. They never gave up. They looked for partial solutions, and they declared that they would string these partial solutions together one at a time until they brought the men home safely. While the astronauts' lives were still in doubt, there was one glaring pessimist in Houston ground control who made the comment that he feared that Apollo 13 might become the worst space disaster in American history. The ground commander in Houston turned to him and said with optimism and anger, "On the contrary, sir, I see Apollo 13 as being our finest hour." And he turned out to be right, which illustrates the life or death effectiveness of optimistic thinking. Whenever you feel pessimistic or overwhelmed, remember to keep thinking. The more you think about a situation, the more you will see small opportunities for action, and the more small actions you take, the more optimistic energy you will receive. An optimist keeps thinking and self-motivates. A pessimist quits thinking and then just quits. In the Broadway musical South Pacific, the heroine sings apologetically about being a cockeyed optimist. She admits she's immature and incurably green. This was an early version of a blonde joke. She confesses, as the giddy song soars melodically, that she's stuck like a dope on a thing called hope and I can't get it out of my heart, not this heart. That's how our society has viewed optimists, they are dopes. Society thinks optimistic thinking is something that comes from the heart, not the head. Pessimists, on the other hand, are realistic. In fact, pessimists will never tell you they are pessimists. In their own minds, they are realists. And when they run into habitual optimists, they sneer at them for always blue-skying everything, and not facing grim reality. Pessimists continually use their imaginations to visualize worst-case scenarios, and then concluding that those scenarios are lost causes, they take no action. That's why pessimism always leads to passivity. But even lying on his couch, bloated with junk food and foggy from too much television, the pessimist knows somewhere in his heart that his "what's the use" attitude is not effective. He is living a life that is reflected in what Nietzsche once said: everything in the world displeased me, but what displeased me most was my displeasure with everything. Optimists have chosen to make a different use of the human imagination. They agree with Colin Wilson's point of view that imagination should be used, not to escape from reality, but to create it. 54. Put on a good debate. Negative thinking is something we all do. The difference between the person who is primarily optimistic and the person who is primarily pessimistic is that the optimist learns to become a good debater. Once you become thoroughly aware of the effectiveness of optimism in your life, you can learn to debate your pessimistic thoughts. The most thorough and useful study I've ever seen on how to do this is contained in Dr. Martin Seligman's classical work, Learned Optimism. The studies done by Seligman demonstrate two very profound revelations: 1. Optimism is more effective than pessimism, and 2. Optimism can be learned. Seligman based his findings on years of statistical research. He studied professional and amateur athletes, insurance salespeople, and even politicians running for office. His scientific studies proved that optimists dramatically outperform pessimists. So what Norman Vincent Peale had been saying for years in his books on the power of positive thinking was finally proven to be scientifically true. Peale had based his books on testimonials and supportive biblical passages. The problem with that was that the people he needed to reach, the most skeptics and pessimists, were precisely the kinds of people who would not be anxious to take anything on faith. But once you've digested the remarkable writings of Seligman, you can go back and read Peale with a new sense of excitement. If you don't accept his religious references, it doesn't matter. The personal testimonials are stimulating enough to give his writing great power. Although his most famous book is The Power of Positive Thinking, I have derived much more motivation from Stay Alive All Your Life and the Amazing Results of Positive Thinking. If you are now skeptical about your power to debate your own pessimistic thoughts, keep in mind that most of us are already great debaters. If somebody comes in and takes one side of an argument, we can usually take the other side and make a case, no matter which side the first person took. Debate teams have to learn to do this. Team members never know until the last second which side of the argument they will be debating, so they learn to be prepared to passionately argue either side. If you catch yourself brooding, worrying, and thinking pessimistically about an issue, the first step is to recognize your thoughts as being pessimistic. Not wrong or untrue, just pessimistic. And if you are going to get the most out of your biocomputer, the brain, you must acknowledge that pessimistic thoughts are less effective. Once you've accepted the pessimistic nature of your thinking, you are ready to take the next step. This first step is crucial though. As Nathaniel Branden teaches, you can't leave a place you've never been. The second step is to build a case for the optimistic view. Start to argue against your first line of reasoning. Pretend you're an attorney whose job is to prove the pessimist in you wrong. Start off on building your case for what's possible. You'll surprise yourself. Optimism is by nature expansive. It opens door after door to what's possible. Pessimism is just the opposite. It is constrictive. It shuts the door on possibility. If you really want to open up your life and motivate yourself to succeed, become an optimistic thinker. 55. Make trouble work for you. One evening, many years ago, My then 14-year-old daughter Stephanie went for a walk with a friend, promising me she would be back home before 10 p.m. I didn't pay much attention to the clock until the 10 o'clock news ended and I realized that she hadn't come home yet. I started to get nervous and irritated. I began pacing the house, wondering what to do. At 11:30 I got in my car and started cruising the neighborhood looking for her. My thoughts were understandably anxious, part fear and part anger. Finally, at 11:45, I drove back past my own house and saw her silhouette in the window. She was home and safe. But I kept driving. I realized that I was thinking completely pessimistically about the entire incident and I needed to keep thinking before I talked to her. As I drove along I observed all the pessimism I was wallowing in. She doesn't respect me. She can't keep a promise. My rules and requests mean nothing. This is the tip of the iceberg. I'm going to have problems with her for the next 4 years at least. Who knows where she went and what she was doing? Were drugs involved? Sex? Crime? I'm losing sleep over this. This is ruining my peace of mind and my life. Etc. By recognizing how pessimistic my thoughts were, I was able to let the thoughts play completely out before taking a deep breath and telling myself, okay. That's one side of the argument. Now it's time to explore the other side. One of my favorite tricks for flipping my mind over to the optimistic side is to ask myself the question, how can I use this? How could I use this incident to improve my relationship with my daughter? How could I make my rules and requests more meaningful to us both? I began to build my case for optimism. I realized that great relationships are built by incidents like these. They are not built by theoretical conversations but by difficult experiences and what we learn and gain from them. So I decided to drive a little while longer and let her wait inside. I was sure that by now her sister had told her that I was out looking for her, so she was now the one pacing and anxious. Let her sweat a little, I thought, while I continued to think things through. I continued to reflect upon my past relationship with Stephanie. One of the great aspects of it was Stephanie's honesty. She had always radiated a quiet and confident kind of serenity about life, and found it easy to be honest with her own feelings and honest with other people. Whenever there had been incidents with other children, teachers, or other parents involved in some misunderstanding, I could always count on Stephanie to tell me the truth. Asking her about what happened always saved me a lot of time. As I drove the dark neighborhood I also ran through my happiest memories of Stephanie as a little girl, how much I loved her and how proud I was of her when I went to her concerts or talked to her teachers. I recalled the time in grade school when I embarrassed her by asking her principal if he would consider renaming the school after her. She had just won an academic award of some kind and I was intoxicated with pride. Finally my mind was completely won over to the optimistic side. How can I use this? Gave me the idea that this incident could be made into something bigger than it seemed, a new commitment to each other to keep agreements and trust each other. When I finally got home I could see that she was scared. She tried to blame the incident on her not having a watch. She wanted me to appreciate that, somehow, she was a victim of the whole incident. I listened patiently and then I told her I thought it was a much bigger deal than that. I talked about my relationship with her and how I had cherished her truthfulness throughout her childhood. I told her that I thought we might have lost all of that tonight. That we might have to figure a way to start over. It's not that big a deal, she protested. But I told her that I thought it was a very big deal, because it was all about our relationship and whether we were going to keep agreements with each other. I told Stephanie I wanted her to be as happy as she could possibly be, and the only way I could really help that happen would be if we kept agreements with each other. I told her how scared I was, how angry I was, how her staying out had ruled out a good night's sleep for me. I asked her to try to understand. I talked about our life together when she was a little girl, and I reminded her how extraordinarily truthful she was. I mentioned a few incidents when she got in trouble but how I had gone right to her for the truth and always got it. We talked for a long time that night, and she finally saw that coming home when she says she's coming home indeed, doing what she says she's going to do is a really big deal. It's everything. Since that incident and conversation, Stephanie has been extremely sensitive to keeping her word. If she goes out and promises to be back at a certain time, she takes along a watch or makes certain someone she's with has one. The incident that night is something neither of us will forget, because it got us clear on the idea of trust and agreements. You could even say that it was a good thing. We have heard of so many incidents where bad events in retrospect were strokes of great fortune. A person who broke her leg skiing met a doctor in the hospital, fell in love, married him, and had a happy relationship for life. Because most of us have experienced a number of these incidents, we're aware of the dynamic. What seems bad, like a broken leg, turns out unexpectedly great. We begin to see the truth that every problem carries a gift inside it. By choosing to make use of seemingly bad events, you can access that gift much sooner. By asking yourself, how can I use this, or what might be good about this, you can turn your life around on a dime. 56 Storm your own brain. The term brainstorming is now very well known in American business life. I first learned it many years ago when I worked as a copywriter in an ad agency. Whenever we would get a new account, our agency's president would get us all together to brainstorm for creative ideas for the client. The main rules of the brainstorming session are 1. There are no stupid ideas, the more unreasonable the better, and 2. Everyone must play. I have sometimes facilitated brainstorming sessions with business managers. We go around the table and each person puts out an idea and the facilitator writes it on the flip pad. We go around and around until all the reasonable ideas are exhausted and the unreasonable ideas start to flow. It is usually among the unreasonable ideas that something great is discovered. Brainstorming works so well because the usual restraints against stupidity are lifted. It's okay to be unreasonable and far out. What most people in business don't realize is that this powerful technique can be used by an individual, alone with himself or herself. I first discovered this while driving in my car a number of years ago, listening to a motivational tape by Earl Nightingale. He talked about a system he had learned that worked wonders. On the top of a piece of paper you put a problem you want solved or a goal you want reached. You then put numbers 1 through 20 on the paper and begin your brainstorming session. The rules are the same as with a group session. You have to list 20 ideas, and they don't have to be well thought out or even reasonable. Give yourself permission to flow. Your only objective is to have 20 ideas scrawled down within a certain short amount of time. If you do this for a week, you will end up with 100 ideas. Are all of them usable? Of course not, but who cares? When you began the process you probably didn't have any usable ideas. I have used this system myself over and over with really great results. It works so well because it relaxes the normal tensions against creative, outrageous thinking. It invites the right side of your brain to play along. Recently a friend called for some advice about his career. He was in show business and had developed his act to the point where he was one of the top performers in the nation. His problem was marketing and self-promotion. That part of his career was lagging behind his talent. What if I told you that there is someone who can give you 100 specific marketing ideas tailored to your precise career and audience? I asked him. He was very interested. You, yourself are that person, I said. I then told him about the list of 20 self-storming technique I had personally been using for a number of years. He eagerly jotted down the rules of the game and got busy playing. 2 weeks later he called me very excited about the results. I've got some really great marketing ideas right now, more than I've ever had in the past, he said. Thanks. Self-mentoring is the best mentoring you can get because your mentor knows you so well. And although it's often beneficial to get specific outside personal coaching, the best coaching teaches us to look within. A great mentor once said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." 57 Keep changing your voice. There have been times when I have been told that I am lucky to have a good speaking voice. And some people are impressed that I rarely use a microphone in my seminars, even with hundreds of people in the audience. People will conclude that I have been blessed with a powerful set of vocal cords. But it is not true. As I related in an earlier chapter, my voice used to be no better than a feeble monotone. That is, until I got motivated to change it. There were two instances that inspired my system for developing my voice. The first was a magazine interview I read many years ago about the actor Richard Burton, who had perhaps the most mesmerizing speaking voice of all time. Listen to the Broadway recording of Camelot and hear him as King Arthur speak and sing his songs. In the interview, Burton said that his voice was how he made his living, so he made certain that each morning while showering he sang a number of songs to keep his vocal cords strong and supple. Later, on a television talk show, actor Tony Randall told the host how he developed his trademark sing-song acting voice. "I took up opera," he said. "I found that singing opera did more for my stage voice than anything else I ever tried." Those two interviews have stayed in my mind ever since, and I always carry a number of tapes and CDs in my car to sing along with. I crank them up good and loud. This is best done while driving alone, and sing at the top of my lungs. I make certain that I do this every day, even when I don't feel like singing. In the words of William James, there's another benefit: we don't sing because we're happy because we sing. Prior to a major public speech, I'll often get to my location more than an hour ahead of time and then just drive around the neighborhood singing like a madman. Sometimes I worry that my host client might drive by and spot me in my car singing along with Elvis and looking dangerously psychotic. But the benefits are worth that risk. I find that when I drive and sing like that, my breathing is better, my timing is better, and when I speak, my voice effortlessly fills the hall. You might think, I don't speak for a living, so such a weird practice might not be necessary for you. But we all speak. A pleasant, relaxed, and strong speaking voice is a priceless asset to anyone whose job involves communicating with other humans. When referring to people whose speaking voices are pleasing to listen to, many people use words like melodious and well-modulated. This is a good hint to tell if someone is complimenting a great speaking voice. You are not stuck with the voice you have now. Start singing, and soon you'll be creating the voice you'd like to have. The stronger your voice, the stronger your confidence, and the stronger your confidence, the easier it is to motivate yourself. 58. Embrace the new frontier. Fortunately, for all of us, a new frontier is upon us. Because our nation, and world, has entered the information age, the old patterns for living are gone. An article by business writer John Huey appeared in the June 27, 1994 edition of Fortune. In it, Huey observed, "Let's say you're going to a party, so you pull out some pocket change and buy a little greeting card that plays Happy Birthday when it's opened. After the party, someone casually tosses the card into the trash, throwing away more computer power than existed in the entire world before 1950. In the old paradigm, forged in the industrial age, we human beings became less and less useful and adventurous. We found lifelong employment in guaranteed jobs and did our jobs the same way until retirement. Then, once we reached retirement age, we became thoroughly useless to society and lived lives dependent on the government, our relatives, or our own savings that we accumulated in our useful years. Now, with the technological explosion and entry into the information age, employers are no longer as interested in our job histories as they used to be. They are now more interested in our current capabilities. One of the romantic appeals of the early Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett frontier days in our nation was the usefulness of individuals. If you were living out on the frontier, farming, cooking, and hunting, and you turned 65, it would never occur to anyone to ask you to retire. We have finally come back to those days of honoring usefulness over age and status. For example, if my company is trying to enter the Chinese market to sell its software and you, at age 70, can speak fluent Chinese, know all about software, and have energy and a zest for success, how can I afford to ignore you? Bill Gates of Microsoft has said, our company has only one asset: human imagination. If you took all of Microsoft's buildings, real estate, office hardware, physical assets, anything you can touch away from the company, where would it be? Almost exactly where it is now. Because in today's world a company's value is in its thinking, not in its possessions. This is great news for the individual because usefulness is back in style. If you can cultivate your skills, keep learning new things, study computers, learn a foreign language, or become expert in a foreign culture and market, you can make yourself useful. The great basketball coach John Wooden recommended that we live by this credo, especially apt for the new technological frontier: learn as if you were to live forever. Live as if you were to die tomorrow. Gone are the days when your employability depended primarily on your job history, your school ties, your connections, your family, or your seniority. Today your employability depends on one thing: your current skills. And those skills are completely under your control. This is the new frontier. And where we once entered retirement age nervous about the wolves at our door, today, with a commitment to lifelong growth through learning, we can be as useful to the world community as we are motivated to be. The more we learn about the future, the more motivated we become to be a valuable part of it. 59. Upgrade your old habits. Super motivation is much more difficult to achieve when we are held back mentally by bad habits. Trying to move toward the life we want while dragging along our bad habits was described in the Scottish rock group Del Amitry's song lyrics: "It's like driving with the brakes on, it's like swimming with your boots on." But here's the catch: bad habits simply cannot be broken. Nor can they be gotten rid of. Ask the millions who continue to try. They always end up, in the words of Richard Brautigan, trying to shovel mercury with a pitchfork, because our bad habits exist for good reasons. They're there to do something for us, even if that something ends up being self-destructive. Down deep, even a bad habit is trying to make us operate better. People who smoke are trying, even through their addiction, to do something beneficial, perhaps to breathe deeply and relax. Such breathing is needed to balance stress, so their smoking is a way in which they are trying to make themselves better. Bad habits are like that: they are based on a perceived benefit. That's why they're so hard to just get rid of. That's why habits must be respected and understood before they can be transformed. What created the habit must be built upon, not killed. We must go to the beneficial impulse that drives the habit, and then expand on that to make the habit grow from something bad into something good. Let's take drinking as an example. I've known people who used to be drunk all the time who are now sober all the time. How did they do it? Couldn't we just say that they just got rid of their drinking habit? Not really. Because, without exception, the recovered people I know replaced their drinking with something else. Taking all of one's courage, relaxation, and spirituality from a bottle of alcohol is a very damaging habit. But to simply eliminate it leads to even worse problems: shakes, DTs, fear, dread, paranoia. A total void. People who join Alcoholics Anonymous, however, replace their false courage once found in a bottle of alcohol with real courage found in the meeting rooms of AA. The completely artificial sense of spirituality formerly found in a tumbler of spirits is replaced by the true and deeply personal spirituality found in working the 12-step program of enlightenment. The superficial but highly emotional relationships the alcoholic had made in his favorite bars are replaced by real friendships. Replacement is powerful because it works, and where bad habits are concerned it's the only thing that works. I've known people who quit smoking without intending to. They took up running, or some form of regular aerobic exercise, and soon the breathing and relaxation they were getting from the exercise made the smoking feel bad to their bodies. They quit smoking because they had introduced a replacement. People who diet have the same experience. It isn't staying away from fattening food that works, it's introducing a regular diet of delicious, healthy food that works. It's replacement. Subconsciously you don't think your bad habits are bad. And that's because they're filling a perceived need. So the way to strengthen yourself is to identify the need and honor it. Honor the need by replacing the current habit with one that is healthier and more effective. Replace one habit, and soon you'll be motivated to replace another. 60. Paint your masterpiece today. Think of your day as a blank artist's canvas. If you go through your day passively accepting whatever other people and circumstances splatter on your canvas, you will more than likely see a mess where art could be. If the mess troubles your sleep, your next new day will begin in a state of fatigue and mild confusion. From such a state, your canvas will be splattered all the more with shapes you don't like and colors you never chose. Thinking of your day as a painter's canvas will allow you to be more conscious of what is happening to you when you flood your mind with nothing but internet gossip, commercials on the radio, the latest murder trial, your spouse's criticisms, office politics, and pessimistic musical lyrics. If you'll allow yourself to step back far enough to realize and truly see that your daily canvas is filling up with all these negative things, a certain freedom occurs. It's the freedom to choose something better. The more conscious we are of our freedom to paint whatever we want on our canvas, the less we go through life as a victim of circumstances. Many of us aren't even aware of our own victim status. We read whatever's on the coffee table, listen to whatever's on the car radio, eat whatever's handy, scan whatever's on the internet, talk to whomever calls us on the phone, and watch whatever's on the television, often too passive to even click the remote control. We must be aware that we have it in us to change all that. We can paint our day our way. The best time management or day painting course I ever took was taught by Dennis Deaton. His seminar's main point is that we can't manage time, we can only manage ourselves. Clear the clutter from your mind, Deaton says, and remove the obstacles to greater success. While most time management courses feel like courses in engineering, Deaton has captured the spirit of the artist in his teaching. His prescriptions for managing your day all stem from goal creation and living the visions you create. Wake up and visualize your day as a blank canvas. Ask yourself, who's the artist today? Blind circumstance, or me? If I choose to be the artist, how do I want to paint my day? 61 Swim laps underwater. When Bobby Fischer prepared for his World Championship chess match with Boris Spassky, he prepared by swimming laps underwater every day. He knew that as the chess matches wore on into the late hours, the player with the most oxygen going to his brain would have the mental advantage. So he built his chess game by building his lungs. When he defeated Spassky, many were surprised by his astonishing wit and mental staying power, especially late in the matches when both players should have been weary and burned out. What kept Bobby Fischer alert wasn't caffeine or amphetamines, it was his breathing. General George Patton once gave a lecture to his troops on brain power. He, too, knew the connection between breathing and thinking. In war, as in peace, a man needs all the brains he can get, said Patton. Nobody ever had too many brains. Brains come from oxygen. Oxygen comes from the lungs where the air goes when we breathe. The oxygen in the air gets into the blood and travels to the brain. Any fool can double the size of his lungs. I learned about Patton's passion for teaching his troops deep breathing from Porter Williamson. I had once written a few political radio and television commercials that caught Mr. Williamson's attention, so he called me and asked me to lunch one day. Because he had identified himself as the author of Patton's Principles, I eagerly accepted his invitation, having coincidentally read the marvelous book a few weeks earlier. Williamson had served in the Army for many years as Patton's most trusted legal advisor. Williamson told me many stories about serving with Patton, and how truly extraordinary a motivator the general was. Most of the Patton quotes in this book come from Williamson's own memories of his service with the great general. Williamson told me about how he himself had lost his leg to bone cancer, and how the doctors had erroneously forecasted his death twice. His inner strength, he said, often came from the inspiration he received in his days of serving with Patton. Frequently, General Patton would stop at my desk, recalled Williamson, and ask, "How long you been sitting at that desk? Get up and get out of here. Your brain stops working after you sit in a swivel chair for 20 minutes. Keep the body moving around so the juices will run to the right places. It'll be good for the brain. If you sit in that chair too long, all of your brain power will be in your shoes. You cannot keep your mind active when your body is inactive. That one principle, an active mind cannot exist in an inactive body, became Bobby Fischer's secret weapon in winning the world championship of chess. Who would have guessed that swimming underwater would make you a better chess player? Certainly not the overweight, worn-out chess genius Boris Spassky. Sometimes, all you need is the air that you breathe to motivate yourself. Going for a run or a walk or simply deep breathing gives the brain the fuel it feeds on to be newly refreshed and creative. 62. Bring on a good coach. After a rare disappointing round on the golf course, Tiger Woods will often take a golf lesson. When I first heard about this, I asked myself, who could give Tiger Woods a lesson in golf? But that was before I ever really understood the value of coaching. The person who taught me that value was a young business consultant named Steve Hardison. Hardison taught me this: Tiger takes a lesson not because his coach is a better player who can give advice and tips, but because his coach can stand back from Tiger Woods and see him objectively. Steve Hardison had created an art form of coming into corporations and seeing things objectively. In fact, his perception ran deeper than that. He had near psychic power to see what was missing. It was a gift he could also apply to individuals, but only if they were ready for the rigors of his coaching. I used to teasingly call one of his illustrative personal stories the parable of the mission. As a young missionary for his church in England, Hardison broke all records for enrolling congregants. He contrasted his own method with that of the other missionaries. While the others would rush out and knock on doors all day, Hardison would spend the first part of each day planning and plotting his activities. By creating his day before it happened, he was able to combine visits, economize on travel time, and increase the number of enrollment conversations in a given day. He also used his creative planning time to set up intra-neighborhood referrals for himself so that many of his visits came with a reference. The other missionaries were very active, but they were focused on the activity, not the result. They were in the business of knocking on doors and scurrying about. Steve was in the business of enrolling people into the church. The records he set for enrollment were no accident. He planned things that way. Steve helped me understand something that lives inside of all of us, something he called the voice. When you wake up in the morning, the voice is there right away, telling you that you are too tired to get up or too sick to go to work. During a sales meeting, when you are just about to say something bold to a client, the voice might tell you to cool it. Hold back. Be careful. The trick is, said Steve, to not ignore or deny the existence of the voice. Because it's there, in all of us. No one is free of the voice. However, you don't have to obey the voice. You can talk back to the voice. And when you really get good, you can even talk trash to the voice. Make fun of it. Ridicule it. Point out how stupid it is. And once you get into that way of debating your own doubts, you start to take back control of your life. Many times I'd be in the middle of a large business project and ask to meet with Steve for an hour. After he listened for a few minutes, he would almost invariably see right away what was missing in my behavior. Like a great golf teacher watching Tiger Woods' backswing, he would say, "Are you willing to accept some coaching on this?" And I would eagerly say yes. Then he would tell me truthfully, sometimes ruthlessly, what he saw. I didn't always like what he saw, but I always grew stronger from talking about it. Hardison's coaching was so jolting that sometimes it reminded me of an incident that happened to me when I was a boy playing Little League baseball. I had injured my knee in a play at third base, and when the game was over, the knee was swollen and my entire leg was stiff. As I sat on the bench with my leg straight out in front of me, a doctor whose son was on our team was kneeling down by my leg as my father looked on. "I'd like you to bend your leg now," he said to me as his hands gently held my swollen knee. "I can't," I told him. "You can't?" he asked, looking up at me. "Why can't you?" "Because I tried, and it really hurts." The doctor looked at me for a second, and then said simply but gently, "Then hurt yourself." I was startled by his request. Hurt myself? On purpose? But then, without saying anything, I slowly bent my leg. Yes, there was tremendous pain, but that didn't matter. I was still mesmerized by his request. The doctor massaged my knee with his fingers and nodded to my father that everything would be okay. I'd have to have X-rays and the usual precautionary exam, but he saw nothing seriously wrong for now. But I was still aware that something very big had just happened to me. After a boyhood that was characterized by avoiding pain and discomfort of any kind, all of a sudden I saw that I could hurt myself if I needed to, and that I could do it calmly without batting an eye. Perhaps I wasn't the coward I'd always thought I was. Perhaps there was as much courage in me as in anyone else, and it was all a matter of being willing to call on it. It was a defining incident in my life, and it was not dissimilar to the way Steve Hardison, as a coach, has required that I call on things inside me that I didn't know I had. One time I was having a hard time enrolling people into seminars and doing my prospecting calls on the phone. Steve grabbed the phone and started calling people and signing them up. Then he accidentally dialed a wrong number and reached some mechanic at a car repair garage. Most people would have apologized at that point and hung up and dialed again. But rather than waste the call, Steve introduced himself and then stayed on the phone until the mechanic had signed up for a seminar. Hardison is a gifted and courageous public speaker, a resourceful and relentless salesperson, a talented athlete and a committed family man and church member. The kind of guy who used to make me sick. I could write an entire book about Steve Hardison's remarkable work in coaching and consulting, and someday I just might. Examples of ways that he coached me to higher levels of performance are plentiful. But I think the greatest thing he has taught me is the value of coaching itself. Once you open yourself up to being coached, you begin to receive the same advantages enjoyed by great actors and athletes everywhere. When you open yourself up to coaching, you don't become weaker, you grow stronger. You become more responsible for changing yourself. In The Road Less Traveled, M. Scott Peck writes, "The problem of distinguishing what we are and what we are not responsible for in this life is one of the greatest problems of human existence. We must possess the willingness and the capacity to suffer continual self-examination. The best coaches show us how to examine ourselves. It takes courage to ask for coaching, but the rewards can be great. The best moments come when your coach helps you do something you have previously been afraid to do." When Hardison would recommend that I do something I was afraid to do, I'd say, "I don't know if I could do that." "So don't be you," he would say. "If you can't do that, then be someone else. Be someone who could do it. Be De Niro, be Bruce Lee, be anybody, I don't care, as long as you do it." Coaching's contribution to my life is illustrated in these words by French philosopher Guillaume Apollinaire. "Come to the edge," he said. They said, "We are afraid." "Come to the edge," he said. They came. He pushed them. And they flew. You can get coaching anytime. If coaching is appropriate for your golf or tennis game, it is even more appropriate for the game of life. Ask someone to be honest with you and coach you for a while. Let them check your swing. Let them tell you what they see. It's a courageous thing to do, and it will always lead to more self-motivation and growth. 63 Try to sell your home. Once when Steve Hardison and I were discussing a few of my old habits that were holding me back from realizing my business goals, I blurted out to him, "But why do I do those things? If I know they hold me back, why do I continue to do them?" "Because they are home to you," he said. "They feel like home. When you do those things, you do them because that's what you're comfortable doing, and so you make yourself right at home doing them. And as they say, there's no place like home. Home can be an ugly place if it's not kept up and consciously made beautiful. Home can be a dark, damp prison, smelling of bad habits and laziness. But we still don't want to leave it, no matter how bad it gets, because we think we are safe there. However, When we inspect the worn-out house more closely, we can see that the safety we think we're experiencing is pure self-limitation. It's very hard to leave home. Many of us try and fail many times. Noel Paul Stookey wrote a hauntingly beautiful song called The House Song, which captures this feeling. The opening words are, "This house goes on sale every Wednesday morning, and is taken off the market in the afternoon." After grasping Hardison's metaphor of home, I immediately saw that I needed to move out of my house. I needed to move up in the neighborhood. I needed a better home. A home that contained habits that would keep me focused on goal-oriented activity. Hardison helped coach me in that direction until the new activities began to feel like where I should have been living all along. Hardison's metaphor of home as the equivalent of old disempowering habits has stayed with me for a long time. Recently, while I was putting together a tape of motivational music to play in my car, I included the energetic "I'm Going Home" by Alvin Lee and 10 Years After. As I drove around listening to it turned up all the way, I thought about what Hardison taught. I let the song be about the new home I would always be in the process of moving to. Don't be afraid to leave the psychic home you're in. Get excited about building a larger, newer, happier home in your mind, and then go live there. In Colin Wilson's brilliant but little known, out-of-print novel Necessary Doubt, he created Gustav Newman, a fascinating character who made many discoveries about human beings. At one point Newman says, "I came to realize that people build themselves personalities as they build houses to protect themselves from the world. They become its prisoners. And most people are in such a hurry to hide inside their four walls that they build the house too quickly." Identify the habits that keep you trapped. Identify what you have decided is your final personality and accept that it might be a hasty construction built only to keep you safe from risk and growth. Once you've done that, you can leave. You can get the blueprints out and create the home you really want. 64. Get your soul to talk. We've always been a little nervous, culturally, about talking to ourselves. We usually associate it with insanity. But it was Plato who said that his definition of thinking was the soul talking to itself. If you really want to get your life worked out, there is no one better to talk to than yourself. No other person has as much information about your problems, and no other person knows your skills and capabilities better. And there's no one else who can do more for you than yourself. A lot of people in the motivational and psychological professions recommend affirmations. You choose a sentence to say, such as, "Every day in every way I'm getting better and better," and repeat it whether or not you think it's true. While affirmations are a good first step to reprogramming, I prefer conversations. Conversations work faster. The two most inspirational guidelines to productive self-conversational exercises are in Martin Seligman's Learned Optimism and Nathaniel Branden's The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. Seligman offers ways to dispute your own pessimism and create the habit of optimistic thinking. Branden offers provocative sentence stems for you to complete. Rather than brainlessly parroting "I'm getting better and better" to myself, it makes a longer lasting impression when I logically argue the case and win. With enough back and forth conversation, I can prove to myself that I am getting better. Proof beats the parrot every time. It's one thing to try to hypnotize myself through repetition of words to accept something as true, and it's quite another to convince myself that it is true. Branden suggests that we get our creative thinking going each morning by asking ourselves two questions: 1. What's good in my life? And 2. What is there still to be done? Most people don't talk to themselves at all. They listen to the radio, watch TV, gossip, and fill up on the words and thoughts of other people all day long. But it's impossible to indulge in that kind of activity and also get motivated. Motivation is something you talk yourself into. 65. Promise the moon. One frightening and effective way to motivate yourself is to make an unreasonable promise to go to someone you care about, either personally or professionally, and promise them something really big. Something that will take all the effort and creativity you've got to make happen. When President John Kennedy promised that America would put a man on the moon, The power of that thrilling promise alone energized all of NASA for the entire time it took to accomplish the amazing feat in his book about the Apollo 13 mission, Lost Moon. Astronaut Jim Lovell called Kennedy's original promise outrageous. But it showed how effective being outrageous could be. In his book Passion, Profit, and Power, Marshall Silver recalls seeing a billboard in Las Vegas put up by one of the casino owners who wanted to become a non-smoker. The billboard read, "If you see me smoking in the next 90 days, I'll pay you $100,000. Can you see the power in that promise? A couple of years ago I promised my children that I would send them to camp in Michigan. They had been to the camp near Traverse City before, and loved it. When you live during the year in Arizona, there's something magical about the water and emerald forests of northern Michigan. It was an expensive camp, but when I made the promise I was doing well financially, and I was confident that they could all go. Then as the summer neared I'd run short of money and had to rearrange my priorities. My speaking schedule had replaced much of the commission selling I was doing and it looked like camp might not be in the picture. I remember specifically talking to my boy Bobby, who was 8 years old at the time, about how times were temporarily hard and how camp didn't look like a good possibility anymore this year. He was in the front seat of the car and I'll never forget for as long as I live the look on his face. He said very softly, so softly that I could barely hear him, "But you promised." He was right. I didn't say I'd try, I didn't say it was a goal, I promised. And the feelings I had at that moment were so overwhelming that I finally said to him, "Yes, I did promise. And because you reminded me that it was a promise, I will say to you right now that you're going to camp. I'll do what it takes. I'm sorry that I forgot it was a promise." The first thing I did was change jobs, and my first condition on accepting my new job was that my bonus for signing was the exact amount of money it took to send my children to camp. It was done. 66 Make Somebody's Day. To basketball coach John Wooden, making each day your masterpiece was not just about selfish personal achievement. In his autobiography, They Call Me Coach, he mentions an element vital to creating each day. You cannot live a perfect day, he said, without doing something for someone who will never be able to repay you. I agree with that. But there's a way to make sure you can't be repaid, and that's doing something for someone who won't even know who did it. This gets into a theory I've had all my life, that you can create luck in your life. Not from the idea that luck is needed for success, because it isn't. But from the idea that luck can be a welcome addition to your life. You can create luck for yourself by creating it for someone else. If you know about someone who is hurting financially, and you arrange for a few $100s to arrive at their home, and they don't even know who you are, then you've made them lucky. By making someone lucky, something will then happen in your own life that also feels like pure luck. I can't explain why this happens, and I have no scientific basis for it, so all I can say is try it a few times and see if you aren't as startled as I have been at the results. It doesn't have to be money, either. We have a lot of other things to give, always. When you get lucky, you'll get more motivated, because you feel like the universe is more on your side. Experiment with this a little. Don't be imprisoned by cynicism posing as rationality on this subject. See what happens to you when you make other people get lucky. 67 Play the circle game. If you use my 4-minute, 4-circle, goal-setting system described earlier, you can be the creator of your universe. You know, that's blasphemous, a seminar student once told me during a break. Only God can create the universe. But if you believe that, I said, you must also believe, as it is written, that we were all created in God's image. And if you believe in God as the creator, and that he created us in his image, then what are we doing when we don't create? Whose image are we living in when we deliberately do not create? Try this: after you wake up in the morning, wipe the sleep from your eyes, sit down with a pad of paper, and draw 4 circles. These are your own planets. Label the first circle, lifelong dream. And in order to keep this example simple, I'll make it strictly financial, although you can do it with any kinds of goals you want. Your lifelong dream might be to save $500,000 for your retirement years. So, put that number in your life circle. Then look at circle 2, the next planet in your solar system. That circle you will label, my year. What do you need to save in the next year in order to be on course to hit your life savings goal? When you factor in the interest, it's less than you think. And when you arrive at the figure, make certain that it matches up mathematically with your first circle. In other words, if you save this amount, and save, say 10% more each year that follows, will you achieve your life number? If not, do some more math until you get a direct connection between your yearly savings projection and your lifelong goal. Now that you've got your first 2 circles filled with a number, move to the third circle, my month. What would you have to save each month to hit your year's goal? Then put that number down. 3 circles are now filled. Now go to the final circle, my day. What do you need to do today that if you repeated it every day would ensure a successful month? By the way, as I said, this doesn't have to just be about money, it can be about physical fitness, learning a language, relationship networking, spirituality, nutrition, or anything important to you. The power of this system lies in thinking of it as a universe, which, as Wayne Dyer keeps reminding us, means one song. When you work the math, you cannot help but see that each circle, if done successfully, guarantees the success of the next circle. If you hit your daily goal every day, your monthly goal is automatically hit. In fact, you don't even have to worry about it. And if your monthly goal is reached, the yearly goal has to happen. And if your yearly goals are hit, the lifelong goal cannot not be reached. When you study the irrefutable mathematical truth contained in this system, a strange feeling comes over you. You realize that all 4 circles are ultimately dependent on the success of just one circle, the circle labeled, my day. Then you get the strangely empowering sensation that you have just proved on paper that your day and your life are the same thing. There is no future other than the future you are working on today. Your future is not stranded out there somewhere in space. This is what the great poet Rainer Maria Rilke meant when he said, "The future enters into us, in order to transform itself in us, long before it happens." Remember that once you have worked out the math for this, the circle game is only a 4-minute daily exercise. Many times in seminars I give, participants will say that they are too busy for all this goal-setting activity. They have lives to live. But I like to remind them of the words of Henry Ford, who said, "If you do not think about the future, you won't have one." And I also like to stress that I am only talking about 4 minutes a day. The purpose of making the circles mathematically sound is that you can remove the elements of faith and hoping from your action plan. You know your goals will be hit. Who would you want to bet on, the tennis player who has faith that she's going to win or the one who knows she's going to win? By drawing these simple 4 circles you can create your universe anywhere, anytime. Waiting in line at the bank, sitting in the doctor's office, waiting for a meeting to begin, or just doodling. Each time you do it, your universe gets closer to you. Each time you draw the circles you are hit with this revelation, there is absolutely no difference between succeeding today and having a successful life. In The Magic of Believing, Claude Bristol recounts a particularly absent-minded habit of his that, looking back, may have had a bigger impact on shaping his universe than he ever realized. He said that whether he was on the phone, or just sitting in moments of abstraction, he would always have a pen or pencil out doodling. My doodling was in the form of dollar signs like these $, on every paper that came across my desk. The cardboard covers of all the files that were placed before me daily were covered with these markings, so were the covers of telephone directories, scratch pads, and even the face of important correspondence. Bristol's later studies on mind stuff experiments, the power of suggestion, and the art of mental pictures caused him to conclude that his lifelong habit of doodling dollar signs had had an enormous impact on programming his mind to always be opportunistic and enterprising when it came to money. The fortune he acquired demands that we take his observations seriously. 68 Get up a game. It is said that John F. Kennedy's father's credo was, "Don't get mad, get even." And that credo has a certain vengeful, clever wisdom in it as far as it goes, but you might go even further with this credo: don't just get even, get better. When Michael Jordan was a sophomore in high school, he was cut from his high school basketball team. Michael Jordan was told by his coach that he wasn't good enough to play high school basketball. It was a crushing disappointment for a young boy whose heart was set on making the team, but he used the incident not to get mad, not to get even, but to get better. We all have those moments when people tell us, or insinuate to us, that they don't think we measure up, that they don't believe in us. Some of us have entire childhoods filled with that experience. The most common reaction is anger and resentment. Sometimes it motivates us to get even or to prove somebody wrong. But there's a better way to respond, a way that is creative rather than reactive. How can I use this, is the question that puts us on the road to creativity. It transforms the anger into optimistic energy, so we can grow beyond someone else's negative expectations. Johnny Bench, a Hall of Fame baseball player, knew what it was like to not be believed in. In the 2nd grade, he said, they asked us what we wanted to be. I said I wanted to be a ball player and they laughed. In the 8th grade they asked the same question, and I said a ball player, and they laughed a little more. By the 11th grade, no one was laughing. Our country has gone through a difficult period of time since World War II. We no longer value heroes and individual achievement as we once did. Competition has become a bad word. But competition, if confronted enthusiastically, can be the greatest self-motivating experience in the world. What some people fear in the idea of competition, I suppose, is that we will become obsessed with succeeding at somebody else's expense. That we'll take too much pleasure in defeating and therefore being better than somebody else. Many times during conversations with my children's teachers, I am told how the school has progressively removed grades and awards from some activities so that the kids don't feel they have to compare themselves to each other. They are proud of how they've softened their educational programs so that there's less stress and competition. But what they are doing is not softening the program, they are softening the children. If you are interested in self-motivation, self-creation, and being the best you can be, there is nothing better than competition. It teaches you the valuable lesson that no matter how good you are, there is always somebody better than you are. That's the lesson in humility you need, the lesson those teachers are misguidedly trying to teach by removing grades. It teaches you that by trying to beat somebody else, you reach for more inside of yourself. Trying to beat somebody else simply puts the game back into life. If it's done optimistically, it gives energy to both competitors. It teaches sportsmanship. And it gives you a benchmark for measuring your own growth. The poet William Butler Yeats used to be amused at how many definitions people came up with for happiness. But happiness wasn't any of the things people said it was, insisted Yeats. Happiness is just one thing, he said. Growth. We are happy when we are growing. A good competitor will cause you to grow. He will stretch you beyond your former skill level. If you want to get good at chess, play against somebody better at chess than you are. In the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, we see the negative effects of resisting competition on a young chess genius until he starts to use the competition to grow. Once he stops taking it personally and seriously, the game itself becomes energizing. Once he embraces the intriguing fun of competition, he gets better and better as a player, and grows as a person. I mentioned earlier that I'd heard a report on the radio that there was a little league organization somewhere in Pennsylvania that had decided not to keep score in its games anymore because losing might damage the players' self-esteem. They had it all wrong. Losing teaches kids to grow in the face of defeat. It also teaches them that losing isn't the same as dying, or being worthless. It's just the other side of winning. If we teach children to fear competition because of the possibility of losing, then we actually lower their self-esteem. Compete wherever you can. But always compete in the spirit of fun, knowing that finally surpassing someone else is far less important than surpassing yourself. If you're better at a game than I am, when I play against you and try to beat you, it's really not you I'm after. Who I'm really beating is the old me. Because the old me couldn't beat you. 69 Turn your mother down. Psychologist and author M. Scott Peck observes, to a child, his or her parents represent the world. He assumes that the way his parents do things is the way things are done. In Dr. Martin Seligman's studies of optimism and pessimism, he found out the same thing: we learn how to explain the world to ourselves from our parents, and more specifically, our mothers. This tells us that young children listen to what their primary caretaker, usually the mother, says about causes, writes Seligman, and they tend to make this style their own. If the child has an optimistic mother, this is great, but it can be a disaster for the child if the child has a pessimistic mother. Fortunately, Seligman's studies show that the disaster need only be temporary, that optimism can be learned, at any age. But it is not self-motivating to blame mom if you find yourself to be a pessimist. What works better is self-creation, to produce a voice in your head that's so confident and strong that your mother's voice gets edited out, and your own voice becomes the only one you hear. And as much as you want to eliminate the continuing influence of a pessimistic adult from your childhood, remember that blaming someone else never motivates you, because it strengthens the belief that your life is being shaped by people outside yourself. Love your mom, she learned her pessimism from her mother, and change yourself. 70 Face the sun. When you face the sun, wrote Helen Keller, the shadows always fall behind you. This was Helen Keller's poetic way of recommending optimistic thinking. What you look at and what you face grows in your life. What you ignore falls behind you. But if you turn and look only at the shadows, they become your life. When I was younger, I remember hearing other kids tell a joke about Helen Keller. "Have you heard about the Helen Keller doll?" they would ask. "You wind it up and it bumps into things." I've often thought about that joke, and why such a joke about someone who was deaf and blind was funny. I think the answer lies in our nervousness about other people overcoming huge misfortunes. Perhaps we laugh nervously because we haven't overcome our own small ones. In our own day and age, we are quick to consider ourselves victims. We are all victims of some sort of emotional, social, gender, or racial abuse. We enjoy taking what difficulties we have had in life and blowing them up into huge injustices. Helen Keller didn't complain about being from a dysfunctional family, or of being a woman, or of not being given enough money from the government to compensate her for her handicaps. She had challenges most of us can't even imagine, but she refused to become fascinated by them and make her handicaps her life. She didn't want to focus on the shadows when there was so much sun. There is a bumper sticker that I see every so often as I'm driving around: "Life is a bitch and then you die." I always wonder about that bumper sticker because it seems illogical. If life is that bad, death should be welcome. The sticker should say, "Life is a bitch, but the good news is you die." British author G.K. Chesterton used to say that pessimists, like the person with that sticker on his car, don't stay anti-life very long when you put a revolver to their heads. All of a sudden, they can think of a million reasons to live. Those million reasons are always there, down inside of us, waiting to be called up. Our pessimism is usually a false front put on to get sympathy. Another popular bumper sticker has been "Shit happens." I happen to consider that bumper sticker to be ironically optimistic. It's one of the qualities of optimists that they are not surprised, overwhelmed, or offended by trouble. They know that trouble comes, and they know they can handle it. Some people have been upset by the popularity of the slogan, and I've seen them try to counter with the sticker, "Love happens." Actually, they have it wrong. Shit does happen. But love does not. Love doesn't happen all by itself. Love is created. In his stirring book Sunrise, Barry Neil Kaufman tells an astonishing true story of how he and his wife healed their once autistic son and helped nurture him to a happy, extroverted life. Kaufman and his wife made a conscious choice to see their son's disability as a great blessing to them. It was just a choice, like choosing to face the sun instead of facing your shadows. But as Kaufman says, the way we choose to see the world creates the world we see. 71 Travel deep inside. Most of us wait to find out who we are from impressions and opinions we get from other people. We base our own so-called self-image on other people's views of us. "Oh, do you really think I'm good at that?" we ask, when someone compliments us. If we're persuaded that they are being honest and have made a good case, we might try to alter our self-image upward. It's great getting feedback from others, especially positive feedback. We all need it to live and feel good. But when it's all we've got, we're in danger of being far less than we could be, because our self-image always depends on others. And all they see is what we're risking right now. What they never see is what's inside of us, waiting to emerge. Because they can't see that, they will always underrate us. Your journey can be internal. You can travel deeper and deeper inside to find out your own potential. Your potential is your true identity. It only waits for self-motivation to come alive. For this is the journey that men and women make, said James A. Michener, to find themselves. If they fail in this, it doesn't matter much else what they find. Let positive reinforcement and compliments be a mere seasoning to your life. But prepare your life's meal yourself. Don't look outside yourself to find out who you are, look inside and create who you are. 72 Go to war. Anthony Burgess was 40 when he learned that he had a brain tumor that would kill him within a year. He knew he had a battle on his hands. He was completely broke at the time, and he didn't have anything to leave behind for his wife, Lynn, soon to be a widow. Burgess had never been a professional novelist in the past, but he always knew the potential was inside him to be a writer. So, for the sole purpose of leaving royalties behind for his wife, he put a piece of paper into a typewriter and began writing. He had no certainty that he would even be published, but he couldn't think of anything else to do. It was January of 1960, he said, and according to the prognosis, I had a winter and spring and summer to live through, and would die with the fall of the leaf. In that time Burgess wrote energetically, finishing 5.5 novels before the year was through, very nearly the entire lifetime output of E.M. Forster, and almost twice that of J.D. Salinger. But Burgess did not die. His cancer had gone into remission and then disappeared altogether. In his long and full life as a novelist, he is best known for A Clockwork Orange. He wrote more than 70 books, but without the death sentence from cancer, he may not have written at all. Many of us are like Anthony Burgess, hiding greatness inside, waiting for some external emergency to bring it out. I believe that's why my father and many people of his generation speak so fondly about World War II. During the war, they lived in a state of emergency that brought out the best in them. If we don't pay attention to this phenomenon, how crisis inspires our best efforts, we tend to brainlessly create a life based on comfort. We try to design easier and easier ways to live, so that we won't be surprised or challenged by anything. People who get the knack of self-motivation can reverse this process and get that wonderful World War II sense of vitality into their lives. Athletes do it constantly. How do you feel about tonight's game with the Trail Blazers? A reporter once asked basketball star Kobe Bryant. It'll be a war out there, he said with a twinkle in his eye. We don't have to wait for something tragic or dangerous to attack us from the outside. We can get the same vitality going by challenging ourselves from within. A useful exercise for self-motivation is to ask yourself what you'd do if you had Anthony Burgess's original predicament. If I had just a year to live, how would I live differently? What exactly would I do? 73 Use the 5% solution. Many years ago, when I first began considering the idea of changing my life, I went through some emotional mood swings. I would get very high on an idea of who I could be, and I'd set out to change myself overnight. Then my old habits would pull me back to who I used to be, and I would become demoralized and depressed for weeks, thinking I didn't have what it took to change. As the weeks went by, I finally caught on to the idea that great things are often created very slowly, so why couldn't great people be created the same way? I began to see the value in small changes, here and there, that led me in the direction of who I wanted to be. If I wanted to be someone who was healthy and had good eating habits, I would introduce a salad here, a piece of fruit there, and take the creative process very slowly. Now I almost never eat red meat, but it didn't happen by simply ruling it out one night. All the times I tried that, my stomach, which used to far outrank my mind in my internal chain of command, would rule it back in the first time I smelled a barbecue in the neighborhood. Psychotherapist Dr. Nathaniel Branden is known for the effectiveness in his therapy of using sentence completion exercises. By asking his clients to write out or speak 6 to 10 endings, quickly, without thinking, to a sentence stem, he allows people to explore their own minds for their hidden power and creativity. A typical sentence he might ask you to complete 6 to 10 times would be, "If I bring 5% more purposefulness into my life today." Then you, the client, give your rapid endings to the sentence. That's how you find out what you think and secretly know about your own power to add purpose to your life. One of the fascinating aspects of Branden's sentences is the 5% part. It seems like an awfully small amount of change when you look at it, but think of how it would play out. If you brought 5% more purposefulness to your life each day, it would only be 20 days before you had doubled your sense of purpose. Huge things can be accomplished by focusing on one small action at a time. Novelist Anne Lamott recalls an incident in her childhood, the memory of which always helps her get a grip. 30 years ago, she remembers, my older brother, who was 10 years old at the time, was trying to get a report on birds written that he'd had 3 months to write, which was due the next day. We were out at our family cabin in Bolinas, and he was at the kitchen table close to tears, surrounded by binder paper and pencils and unopened books on birds, immobilized by the hugeness of the task ahead. Then my father sat down beside him, put his arm around my brother's shoulder, and said, "Bird by bird, buddy. Just take it bird by bird. When we stay the same, it's not because we didn't make a big enough change, but rather because we didn't do anything today that sent us moving toward change. If you continue to think of yourself as a great painting you are going to paint, then wanting to instantly change is like wanting to finish your portrait in 10 minutes and then put it up in the art gallery. If you see yourself as a masterpiece in progress, then you will relish small change. A tiny thing you did differently today will excite you. If you want a stronger body, and you took the stairs instead of the elevator, celebrate. You are moving in the direction of change. If you want to change yourself, try making the changes as small as they can be. If you want to create yourself, like a great painting, don't be afraid to use tiny brush strokes. 74 Do something badly. Sometimes we don't do things because we're not sure we can do them well. We feel that we're not in the mood or at the right energy level to do the task we have to do, so we put it off, or wait for inspiration to arrive. The most commonly known example of this phenomenon is what writers call writer's block. A mental barrier seems to set in that prevents a writer from writing. Sometimes it gets so severe that writers go to psychotherapists to get help for it. Many writers' means of earning a living depends on its cure. The block, or lack of self-motivation, occurs not because the writer can't write, but because the writer thinks he can't write well. In other words, the writer thinks he doesn't have the proper energy or inspiration to write something, right now, that's good enough to submit. So the pessimistic voice inside the writer says, "You can't think of anything to write, can you?" This happens to many of us, even with something as small as a postcard to send, or an overdue email to answer. But the writer doesn't really need psychotherapy for this. All he or she needs is an understanding of how the human mind is working at the moment of the block. The cure for writer's block and also the road to self-motivation is simple. The cure is to go ahead and write badly. Novelist Anne Lamott has a chapter in her marvelous book Bird by Bird called Shitty First Drafts. The key to writing, she says, is to just start typing anything. It can be the worst thing you've ever written, it doesn't matter. Almost all good writing begins with terrible first efforts, says Lamott. You need to start somewhere. Start by getting anything down on paper. By the mere act of typing you have disempowered the pessimistic voice that tried to convince you not to write. Now you are writing. And once you're in action, it's easy to pick up the energy and pick up the quality. Singer-songwriter Jon Stewart says, when you're in the first stages of creating, never, ever censor yourself. We're often afraid to do things until we're sure we'll do them well. Therefore we don't do anything. This tendency led G.K. Chesterton to say, if a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. Going out for a run gives me an example of the same phenomenon. Because I don't feel that I have a good, strong run in me, the voice says not today. But the cure for that is to decide to do it anyway, even if it will be a bad run. I don't feel like running now, so I'm going to go out and run slowly, in such lazy, bad form that it does me no good, but at least I will have run. But once I start, something always happens to alter my feelings about the run. By the end of the run, I notice that it had somehow become thoroughly enjoyable. In my self-motivation seminars, I often give a homework assignment for people to write down what their main goals are for the next year. I ask them to fill no more than a half page. This is not a difficult assignment for people who are willing to just come off the top of their heads and have fun filling the page. But you would be surprised at how many people absolutely anguish over it, trying to get it right, as if they were going to be held forever to what they write down. Many people simply can't do it. To get them to complete the exercise, I say, put anything down. Make something up. It doesn't even have to be true. They don't even have to be your goals, just do it so you can understand the exercise we're about to do. The point is to just do it. In many ways we are all novelists like Anne Lamott. Our novels are our lives. And many of us get a tragic form of writer's block that causes us to not write anything at all. It's a tragedy, because deep down we are very creative. We could write a great life. It's just that we're so afraid of writing badly, that we never write. Don't let this happen to you. If you're not motivated to do something you know you need to do, just decide to do it badly. Add a little self-deprecating humor. Be comically bad at what you're doing. And then enjoy what happens to you once you're into the process. 75 Learned Visionering. A few years ago I spent some enjoyable time working with motivational speaker Dennis Deaton and teaching his principles of visionering, which he defines as engineering dreams into reality by the use of active mental imaging. When I gave my weekly Thursday night public seminars, I'd sometimes teach Deaton's visionering concepts, and my, then, little daughter Marjorie would always accompany me. She helped hand out workbooks and pencils, and when the seminar got started she would take a seat in the audience, open her own workbook and participate. She was 10 at the time, and I was never certain exactly how much she was absorbing. Then one weekend afternoon by the pool at our apartment complex, I relaxed in a deck chair while Margie and her girlfriend Michelle played by the pool. There were a lot of people in and around the water that day, but above them all I could hear Marjorie and Michelle having a heated conversation down by the deep end of the water. "I just can't do it," said Michelle. "Yes, you can," said Margie. "You just have to believe you can." "I'm afraid to dive," said Michelle. "I've never dived in my life." "Michelle," said Margie, "listen to me. Will you just try it my way?" "I don't know," said Michelle. "Okay, what's your way?" "Just close your eyes," said Margie, "and picture yourself on a diving board. Can you see yourself standing up there?" "Yes," said Michelle. "Okay, good," said Margie. "Now, I want you to get an even better picture. What kind of bathing suit are you wearing? Can you see it?" "It's red, white, and blue," said Michelle, her eyes still closed. "It's like an American flag." "Great," said Margie. "Now picture yourself diving off the board in slow motion, just like in a dream. Can you see that? Yes, I can, said Michelle. That's great, shouted Margie. Now you can do it? Because if you can dream it, you can do it. Let's go over here and do it. Michelle followed her slowly to the end of the pool. I was looking over the top of my book but not letting them know I was listening. I was amazed. I had no idea what would happen next, but I noticed a number of people around the pool area watching and listening with fascination, while pretending not to. Michelle walked up to the edge of the water and looked very scared. She looked at Margie, and Margie said, "Michelle, I want you to keep saying, very softly, if I can dream it, I can do it, and then I want to see you dive in." Michelle kept repeating, "If I can dream it, I can do it," and all of a sudden, surprising even herself, she dove a near-perfect dive into the deep end with almost no splash. Margie was jumping up and down and clapping when Michelle came up from the water. "You did it," she shouted, and Michelle was grinning as she climbed up to do it again. Could it be, I thought to myself, that this system is this simple? The principle is this: you won't do anything you can't picture yourself doing. Visioning is just another word for picturing yourself. Once you make the picturing process conscious and deliberate, you begin to create the self you want to be. We dive into the pictures we create. 76 Lighten things up: sunlight and laughter. That's what cures most fears and worries. Terrifying problems are better solved in the light than in the dark. And there are many ways to bring them into the light. Pick a frightening problem. Then do the following: talk about it with someone, draw an illustrated map of it on a huge piece of paper, make top 10 lists about the problem, tell yourself some jokes about the problem, sing about the problem, and, finally, dance a dance that expresses the problem. If you do all these things, I promise you that your problem will seem a lot funnier, and less frightening, than it once did. It is impossible to laugh deeply and be frightened at the same time. G.K. Chesterton used to say that taking things lightly was the most spiritually advanced thing you could do to improve your effectiveness in life. After all, said Chesterton, it's because God's angels take themselves so lightly that they are able to fly. And if his angels take themselves that lightly, imagine how much more lightly he takes himself. My friend Fred Knipe is a 3-time Emmy Award-winning television writer who also performs as a comedian in the character of Dr. M.F. Ludiker, world expert on everything. Fred is one of the funniest human beings I have ever known. He never fails to lighten me up, no matter how big the problem I have. Dr. Ludiker mounts the stage and puts his ludicrous Ludiker Institute logo in front of the podium, a logo that features a cartoon human brain hanging between 2 electrical towers. He then proceeds to give, in a mild Teutonic accent, his advice from hell. With the increase in domestic violence, the doctor says, I am advocating that home appliance manufacturers begin installing airbags. On the subject of our growing intolerance of crime, he says criminals, among the most deeply tense in our communities, will soon have trouble recruiting top people because they can no longer escape the sense that there is resentment building about what they do for a living. It was inevitable, he observes, that genetic engineering would come from a generation that played Mr. Potato Head. Knipe's editing of my writing also causes me to lighten up. While making helpful handwritten notes on the manuscript for this book, he recommended that I refer to the Lakota shaman lame deer as Super Shaman Lame Deer. While going through my recovery from a frightening disease that featured, at one point, uncontrolled bleeding, he left me a comforting phone message that said, "Don't worry about the bleeding. It's normal for someone your age." Fred shares my long-held belief that humor is the highest form of creativity. It's the hardest to produce and the most enjoyable to receive. Humor, like all other creativity, is a matter of making unusual combinations. The more surprising the combination, the funnier the humor. Your own motivational level will always be lifted by humor. Anytime you are stuck, ask yourself to take things lightly. Ask yourself to come up with some funny solutions. Laughter will destroy all limits to your thinking. When you are laughing, you are open to anything. 77 Serve and grow rich. One good way to motivate yourself is by increasing the flow of money into your life. Most people are embarrassed to even think this way. They don't want to think and grow rich because they think they will be thought of as selfish or greedy. Or maybe they still believe in the thoroughly discredited Marxist economic superstition that to make money, you have to take it away from somebody else. Or else they don't want to come across as being obsessed with money. But do you know who is really obsessed with money? People who don't have any. They obsess about money all day long. It's in their family discussions, it's in their minds at night, and it becomes a destructive part of their relationships during the day. The best way not to be obsessed with money is to trust your game plan for earning your way to financial freedom. Our first duty, said George Bernard Shaw, is not to be poor. The road to not being poor always travels through your professional relationships in life. The more you serve those relationships, the more productive those relationships will become, and the more money you will make. Money is life energy that we exchange and use as a result of the service we provide to the universe, wrote Deepak Chopra in Creating Affluence. When you understand that money flows from service, you have a chance to understand something even more valuable. Unexpectedly large amounts of money come from unexpectedly large degrees of service. The way to generate unexpected service to the people in your life is to ask yourself, what do they expect? Once you're clear on what that is, then ask, what can I do that they would not expect? It's always the unexpected service that gets talked about. And it's always getting talked about that increases your professional value. As Napoleon Hill repeatedly pointed out, great wealth comes from the habit of going the extra mile. And it is always a smart business move to do a little more than you are paid for. It is almost impossible to enjoy a life of self-motivation when you're worried about money. Don't be embarrassed about giving this subject a great deal of thought. Thinking about money a little bit in advance frees you from having to always think about it later. Allow yourself to link financial well-being with an increased capacity for compassion for others. If I am living in poverty, how much love and attention can I give to my children or my fellow humans? How much help can I be if I, for sheer lack of creative planning, am always worried about being in debt? Poverty is no disgrace, said Napoleon Hill. But it is certainly not a recommendation. 78 Make a list of your life. Never hesitate to sit down with yourself and make lists. The more you write things down, the more you can dictate your own future. There is an unfortunate myth that lists make things trivial. But lists do the opposite, they make things come alive. I have a friend who made a list of all the positive things about himself that he could think of. He listed every characteristic and accomplishment that he could remember in his life that he was proud of. He keeps the list in his briefcase, and says he often reads through it when he's feeling down. By seeing all those things written down, and letting myself read them one at a time, I can change my entire attitude from being discouraged to feeling positive about myself, he says. Writing lists of goals and objectives is also a powerful self-motivator. It's one thing to go into a meeting mentally briefed on what you want to accomplish, but you'll feel even stronger having written it out. There is something about writing something down that makes it more real to the right side of your brain. My friend Fred Knipe sometimes travels to Phoenix to spend a day talking with me. We've been close friends since college and share an unorthodox sense of humor. Our meetings together are anything but structured. We free associate and talk about everything under the sun. Yet, I notice that he'll often arrive with a list. In the days prior to our meeting, he'll jot down subjects he wants to be sure he remembers to talk to me about while we are together. And it's because our conversations are so free-form that the list is valuable for him. He doesn't ever have to call me back the next day and try to discuss something over the phone that would have been much better discussed in person. If you've ever tried grocery shopping for a large event without a shopping list, you are aware of the nightmare it can be. Most people have learned not to shop that way. I've learned by hard experience that it can mean additional trips to the store to pick up forgotten items. Yet why is it that people don't apply that same principle to their lives? Most people take more time planning a picnic than they do planning a life. Because they know that if they don't make a list and forget the hot dog buns as a result, they are going to be called an idiot by someone. But isn't a life as important as a picnic? Start by listing all the things you would like to do before you die. Keep the list somewhere handy, where you can look at it and add to it. Then list the people in your life you want to remain close to and stay in touch with. Friendship is so precious, why let it be forgotten? It sounds silly to make a list of your friends, but you'll be surprised at how it reminds you who's important and motivates you to stay in touch. My friend Terry Hill, the writer, is one of the greatest list makers of all time. He has a list of every book he has ever read, every poem he's read, and many more things I don't even know about. It gives his life a sense of history, depth, and direction. We don't have to wait to become famous so that someone else might write our history. We can be writing our history while it happens. And when we list our goals, we're writing our history before it happens. When legendary advertising executive David Ogilvy started his advertising agency, by making a list of the clients that he most wanted: General Foods, Lever Brothers, Bristol Myers, Campbell Soup Company, and Shell Oil. At the time, they were the biggest advertising accounts in the world, and he had none of them. But in a sense he did have them, because they were in his list. It took time, said Ogilvy, but in due course I got them all. A goal gains power when you write it down, and more power every time you write it down. What motivates you most in life ought to be in your own handwriting. People all too often look for motivation in what others have written. If you become a good list maker, you will learn how to motivate yourself by what you've written. 79. Set a specific power goal. Most people are surprised to learn that the reason they're not getting what they want in life is because their goals are too small and too vague, and therefore have no power. Your goals will never be reached if they fail to excite your imagination. What really excites the imagination is the setting of a large and specific power goal. Usually, a goal is just a goal. But a power goal is a goal that takes on a huge reality. It lives and breathes. It provides motivational energy. It gets you up in the morning. You can taste it, smell it, and feel it. You've got it clearly pictured in your mind. You've got it written down. And you love writing it down because every time you do it fills you with clarity of purpose. In his audio tape series, Visioning, my old partner Dennis Deaton teaches the transforming power of lofty goals. Deaton talks about creating a mental movie that you watch as often as possible. He urges you to make it a movie that stars you living the results of achieving your specific goal. Walt Disney left us many great things: Disneyland, Walt Disney World, great animated films, and Annette Funicello. But what I believe was his greatest gift was the summing up he did of his life's work. If you can dream it, he said, you can do it. A power goal is a dream with a deadline. The deadline itself motivates you. People who have created power goals start living on purpose. They know what they're up to in life. How can you tell if you've got a big enough and real enough power goal? Simply observe the effect your goal has on you. It's not what a goal is that matters, it's what a goal does. 80. Change yourself first, don't change other people. It doesn't work. You'll waste your life trying. Many of us spend all our time trying to change the people in our lives. We think we can change them in ways that will make them better equipped to make us happy. This is especially true of our children. We talk to our children for hours about how we think they should change. But children don't learn from what we say. They learn from what we do. Today's children, upon hearing us talk to them about how they should change, will often say, "Yeah, right. I think they got this phrase from Bart Simpson." It's shorthand for "I'm not listening to what you say, I'm listening to what you do." Gandhi was especially tuned into the futility of changing other people. Yet Gandhi was probably responsible for more change in people than any other person in our era was. How did he do it? He had a profoundly simple formula. People would often come to Gandhi to ask how they could change others. Someone would say, "I agree with you about nonviolence, but there are others who don't. How do I change them?" And Gandhi told them they couldn't. He said you couldn't change other people. "You must be the change you wish to see in others," said Gandhi. In my own seminars, I probably use that one quotation more than any other. I am always asked, "How can I change my husband?" Or, "How can I change my wife?" Or, "How can I change my teenager?" People who take the seminars on self-motivation, at some point during the workshop, agree completely with the principles and ideas. Then, they start to think about the people who don't buy in. In the question and answer period, their questions are about those poor people. How do we change them? I always quote Gandhi. Be the change you wish to see in others. By being what you want them to be, you lead by inspiration. Nobody really wants to be taught by lectures and advice. They want to be led through inspiration. Sales managers often ask me how they can get a certain salesperson to do more self-motivated activities. I tell them that they have to be the salesperson they want to see. Take them on a call, I say, and let them watch you. Don't tell them how to do it, inspire them to do it. I once attended a concert given by my daughter's 4th grade chorus, which sang a song called "Let There Be Peace on Earth." The song's words went, "Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me." I beamed when I heard it. It was such a beautiful expression of being the change, a celebration of self-responsibility that rarely is portrayed in young people's lives today. What you tell people to do often goes right by them. Who you are does not. 81 Pin your life down. Car dealer extraordinaire Henry Brown once told me a story about his son, a high school wrestler. His boy had been getting only fair results as a wrestler that year, and when Henry talked to him about it, he learned the reason. Henry's son entered each wrestling match more than thoroughly prepared to counter anything his opponent tried. But no matter how gifted Henry's son was at countering moves, countering was still countering, so the other wrestler always dictated the tempo. Finally, Henry suggested to his son that he try entering a wrestling match with his own attack plan, a series of moves that he would initiate no matter what his opponent tried. The boy agreed, and the results were remarkable. He began winning match after match, pinning opponent after opponent. The young wrestler's goal had always been to win. He didn't have a problem setting goals. But what had to be added was a plan of action. In sports, as in life, goals alone aren't always enough. As Nathaniel Branden says, a goal without an action plan is a daydream. Henry Brown didn't just give that advice to his son because he bought into it theoretically. His own Brown & Brown Chevrolet dealership has many times been the #1 Chevy dealership in the nation because he plans his company's own yearly performance in the same way he coached his son. Every year he has his general manager send me the detailed videotape that outlines the dealership's game plan for the coming year. It includes all the department's projected earnings down to the penny. By boldly charting such a specific course, Brown lets the market respond to him. Once, when I asked him how his dealership got through a previous year's nationwide automotive sales recession, he said, "We decided not to participate in it." Before any adventure, take time to plan. Design your own plan of attack. Don't just counter what some other wrestler is doing. Let life respond to you. If you're making all the first moves, you'll be surprised at how often you can pin life down. 82 Take no for a question. Don't take no for an answer. Take it for a question. Make the word no mean this question: can't you be more creative than that? In my seminars I work with a lot of salespeople, and one of the most requested topics of discussion is cold calling and rejection. One of the greatest problems salespeople, and people everywhere, face is in the meaning they give to someone else's no. Many people hear no as an absolute, final, and devastating personal rejection. But no can mean anything you want it to mean. When I graduated from college with a degree in English, I was not overwhelmed with companies trying to hire me. Most people already speak English. So I decided to try to get a job as a sports writer at the daily evening paper in Tucson, Arizona, the Tucson Citizen. I had spent 4 years in the Army, and I hadn't done any sports writing since high school. When I applied for the job, I was told that my major problem was that I had never done any professional sports writing before. It was the typical situation of a company not being able to hire you because you haven't had experience, but how can you gain experience if no one will hire you? My first impulse was to take no to be their final answer. After all, that's what they said it was. But I finally decided to have no mean, can't you be more creative than that? So I went home to think and plot my next move. The reason they wouldn't hire me was because I had no experience. When I asked them why that was important, they smiled and said, "We have no way of knowing for sure whether you can write sports. Just being an English major isn't enough." Then it hit me. Their real problem wasn't my lack of experience, it was their lack of knowledge. They didn't know whether I could write well enough. So I set out to solve their problem for them. I began to write them letters. I knew they were interviewing 4 other people for the position and that they would decide within a month. Every day I wrote a letter to the sports editor, the late Regis Macaulay, an award-winning writer in his own right, who made his reputation in Cleveland before coming to Tucson. My letters were long and expressive. I made them as creative and clever as I could, commenting on the sports news of the day, and letting them know how great a fit I thought I was for their staff. After a month, Mr. Macaulay called me and said that they had narrowed it down to 2 candidates, and I was one of them. Would I come in for a final interview? I was so excited, I nearly swallowed the phone. When my interview was coming to an end, I was the second one in. Macaulay had one last question for me. "Let me ask you something, Steve," he said. "If we hire you, will you promise that you'll stop sending me those endless letters?" I said I would stop, and then he laughed and said, "Then you're hired. You can start Monday." Macaulay later told me that the letters did the trick. "First of all, they showed me that you could write," he said. "And second of all, they proved to me that you wanted the position more than the other candidates did. When you ask for something in professional life and it is denied to you, imagine that the no you heard is really a question. Can't you be more creative than that? Never accept no at face value. Let rejection motivate you to get more creative." 83. Take the road to somewhere. Energy comes from purpose. If the left side of your brain tells the right side of your brain that there's a sufficient crisis, the right side sends you energy, sometimes superhuman energy. That's why there's such a difference between people who set and achieve goals all day, and people who just do whatever comes up, or whatever they feel like doing. To one person, there is always added purpose. To the other, there is boredom and confusion, the 2 greatest robbers of energy. Knowing what you're up to, and why you're up to it, gives you the energy to self-motivate. Not knowing your purpose drains you of all motivation. We've all heard the stories of the diminutive mother who, seeing that her small child was trapped, lifted a tremendously heavy object, such as a car, so the child could be freed. When asked to repeat the superhuman feat later, of course the woman couldn't do it. Being a single father has put me in touch with the dramatic connection between purpose and energy. If I am cooking something, for example, and out of the corner of my eye I can see flames emerging from the kitchen, it is amazing how fast I can move from the living room into the kitchen. Crisis creates instant purpose, which creates instant energy. The "he ain't heavy, he's my brother" idea is based on purpose. When our purpose is great, so is our strength and energy. But, I don't know what my purpose is, a lot of people tell me, as if someone forgot to tell them what it is. Those people may wait forever to be told how to live and what to live for. There can only be 2 reasons why you don't know your purpose: 1, you don't talk to yourself, and 2, you don't know where purpose comes from. You think purpose comes from outside yourself instead of from within. Purposeful people know how to go deep into their own spirit and talk to themselves about why they exist, and what they want to do with the gift of life. Only human beings have come to a point where they no longer know why they exist, said the Lakota shaman Lame Deer. They don't use their brains and they have forgotten the secret knowledge of their bodies, their senses, or their dreams. Lame Deer is not optimistic about what the future holds for people who live without purpose. They don't use the knowledge the Spirit has put into every one of them, he says. They are not even aware of this, and so they stumble along blindly on the road to nowhere, a paved highway that they themselves bulldoze and make smooth so that they can get faster to the big empty hole that they'll find at the end, waiting to swallow them up. It's a quick, comfortable superhighway, but I know where it leads. I've seen it. I've been there in my vision and it makes me shudder to think about it. Purpose can be built, strengthened, and made more inspiring every day. We are totally responsible for our own sense of purpose. We can go inside our own spirit and create it, or not. The energy of our lives is wholly dependent on how much purpose we're willing to create. 84 Go on a news fast. I first heard the phrase news fast from Dr. Andrew Weil, who writes about natural medicine and spontaneous healing. Weil recommends going on news fasts because he believes this has a healing effect on the human system. To him, it's a genuine health issue. My own recommendation for news fasts has to do with the psychology of self-motivation. If you go for periods of time without listening to or reading the news, you will notice an upswing in your optimism about life. You'll feel a lift in energy. But shouldn't I stay informed, people ask me. Aren't I being a bad citizen if I don't keep up with what's happening in my community? Shouldn't I be watching the news? In answer to this question, I offer an observation that may startle you: the news is no longer the news. It used to be that Walter Cronkite would end his program by saying, "And that's the way it is." And we trusted that he was right. But today, it's much different. Shock value has the highest premium of all for a news story, and the lines are now blurred between the evening news and the grossest tabloids. Tom Brokaw is as likely to lead his show with a story about a woman cutting off her husband's private parts as is the National Enquirer. Today, the goal of the person putting the evening news show together is to stimulate our emotions in as many ways as possible. Every night we will see human suffering. We will also see con artists, and even whole companies getting away with scams that victimize people cruelly. If there's a report on politics, it features the most venomous attacks between two partisans. The goal of the news today is stimulation. It's to take us on an emotional roller coaster ride. It's a good program if we have been enraged by one story, saddened by another, and amused by the third. Is it any wonder that by programming our minds with this gross and frightening information all day and into the night, we end up a little less motivated? Is it hard to understand a certain slippage in our optimism? Going on a news fast is a refreshing cure for this problem. You can do it for one day a week, to begin with, and then get back into the tabloid shows the next day if you have to. Once you start fasting, you'll find your entire mood picking up. But what about staying informed, you ask? There are many ways to stay fully informed. The internet has wonderful, thoughtful sites. In fact, it is far better to be informed intellectually than to be informed emotionally. There are weekly and monthly magazines as well as e-zines that do a fine job of informing us and giving us a calm, thoughtful, overall perspective of the news. Don't worry about missing out on important news. Really big news, like a war, a natural disaster, or an assassination will get to you just as quickly during a news fast as it would if you were watching the news. Begin to experiment with news fasts today. Go on a short one at first, and then extend the periods of time as your system allows. When you do return to the news, be totally conscious of just what the show is trying to do to you. Don't passively take it in as if what you are seeing is really the way it is. It's not. They're not going to tell you how many thousands of planes landed safely today. 85 Replace worry with action. Don't worry. Or rather, don't just worry. Let worry change into action. When you find yourself worrying about something, ask yourself the action question: what can I do about this right now? And then do something. Anything. Any small thing. Most of my life, I spent my time asking myself the wrong question every time I worried. I asked myself, what should I be feeling about this? I finally discovered that I was much happier when I started asking, instead, what can I do about this? If I am worried about the conversation I had with my wife last night, and how unfair I might have been to say the things I said, I can ask myself, what can I do about that right now? By putting the question into the action arena, a lot of possibilities will occur to me. 1. I could send her flowers, or 2. I could call her to tell her I was concerned about how I left things, or 3. I could leave a nice little note somewhere for her, or 4. I could go see her to make things right. All of these possibilities are actions, and when I act on something, the worry goes away. We often hear the phrase worry it to death. But that phrase doesn't reflect what really happens when we worry. It would be great if we could worry something to death. When it dies, we could dispose of the body and be done with it. But when we worry, we don't worry a thing to death, we worry it to life. Our worrying makes the problem grow. And most of the time, we worry it into a grotesque kind of life, a kind of Frankenstein's monster that frightens us beyond all reason. I once came up with a system for action that helped turn my worrying habits completely around. I would list the 5 things that I was worried about. Perhaps they were 4 projects at work and the 5th was my son's trouble he was having with a certain teacher. I would then decide to spend 5 minutes on each problem doing something, anything. By deciding this, I knew I was committing myself to 25 minutes of activity. No more. So it didn't feel at all overwhelming. Then I could make a game of it. On Project 1, a seminar workbook deadline for a new course, I'd spend 5 minutes writing it. Maybe I only got the first 2 pages done, but it felt great. It felt like I'd finally started it. Then on item number 2, a meeting I knew I had to have with a client over a sticky contract issue, I would call his office and schedule the meeting and put it in my calendar. That, too, felt good. My third worry, a stack of correspondence I needed to answer, I would take 5 minutes sorting and stacking and putting them into a folder that was separate from the other clutter on my desk. That felt satisfying, too. The fourth item was a travel arrangement that had to be worked out. I'd take no more than 5 minutes looking at my calendar and leaving a voicemail for my travel agent to fax me some alternatives on the trip. Finally, on the matter of my son, I would pull out a piece of paper and write a short letter to his teacher expressing my concern for him, my support of her efforts, and my desire to arrange a meeting quickly, so all 3 of us could sit down together and make some agreements. All of that took 25 minutes. And the 5 things that were worrying me the most were no longer worrying me. I could then go back anytime later and work them to completion. If something is worrying you, always do something about it. It doesn't have to be the big thing that will make it disappear. It can be any small thing. But the positive effect it will have on you will be enormous. A friend of mine was worried about her cat, which had some mild symptoms of illness, but nothing that looked severe enough to take the cat to the veterinarian. She also thought the symptoms were so subtle that they might not be easy to describe to the vet, but still she worried. She brought the subject up 2 or 3 more times before I finally said to her, "You must do something." "That's just the problem, there's nothing to do," she said. "Take some kind of action," I said. "Call the vet and talk to him." That doesn't make sense because the vet wouldn't know anything from what I told him, and he'd probably ask me to take her in to see him, and I know it's not that serious, she said. "Yes, I understand," I said, "but you should take the action for you, not for the cat or the vet. By not doing anything you're keeping yourself trapped in worrying." "Okay," she said. "I see what you mean." When she called the vet, to her surprise, the vet was able to make a good assessment of what was wrong. He recommended that she bring the cat in, and if it was what he thought it was, he could give her something to clear it up right away. Anything that worries you should be acted on, not just thought about. Don't be scared about the action, you can make it very small and easy, as long as you take an action. Even small actions will chase away your fears. Fear has a hard time coexisting with action. When there's action, there's no fear. When there's fear, there's no action. The next time you're worried about something, ask yourself, what small thing can I do right now? Then do it. Remember not to ask, what could I possibly do to make this whole thing go away? That question does not get you into action at all. Acting on your worries frees you up for other things. It removes fear and uncertainty from your life and puts you back in control of creating what you want. Just do it. 86 Run with the Thinkers. The president of a major office equipment company put his problem to me this way: how do I get the winners in my company to stop whining and start coming up with solutions? He went on to explain that he had two kinds of people working for him, the winners and the thinkers. The winners were often very smart and dedicated employees who worked long, hard hours. But when they came into the manager's office, it was almost always to complain. They're great at finding fault with other managers and telling me what's wrong with our systems, the president said, but they are a drain on me because they're so negative that I end up trying to make them feel better. After that, I'm depressed. The thinkers, on the other hand, had a different way of coming into the office with problems. The thinkers come to me with ideas, he said. They see the same problems that the winners see, but they've already thought about possible solutions. The thinkers, in other words, have assumed ownership of the company, and are creating the future of the company with their thinking. The winners have stopped thinking. Once the problems are identified, and their reaction to them justified, the thinking stops. The thinkers have taken their reaction to the company's problems past their emotions, and into their minds. And because they have formulated some solutions, the nature of their meeting with the manager is creative. It's a brainstorming meeting. The manager enjoys these meetings because they stimulate his mind, too. Both parties leave the meeting feeling energized intellectually, and the manager looks forward to future meetings with the thinkers. The winners have left their reaction to their company's problems down at the emotional level. They express resentment, fear, and worry. The manager's problem in such a meeting is that he deals primarily with those emotions, so he finishes the meeting with his own sense of discouragement. When you are committed to self-motivation as a way of life, you will fall into the realm of the thinker. Your thinking not only creates your motivation, but it creates your relationships, your family, and the organization you work for as well, because they are all a part of you. You are more valuable to your organization with this orientation to thinking, and you're more valuable to yourself. 87 Put more enjoyment in. There is a huge difference between pleasure and enjoyment. And when we're absolutely clear about the difference, we can grow much faster toward a focused and energized life. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi best describes this difference in his various books on flow, the psychological state that we get in when time disappears and we are thoroughly engaged in what we're doing. Csikszentmihalyi distinguishes what we do for pleasure, routine sex, eating, drinking, etc., from what we do for enjoyment. Enjoyment is deeper. Enjoyment always involves the use of a skill and the facing of a challenge. So sailing, gardening, painting, bowling, golfing, cooking, and any such activity involving skills meeting a challenge constitute enjoyment. People who get clear on that difference begin to put more enjoyment into their lives. They reach the happy and fulfilled psychological state known as flow. Increasing their skills and seeking challenges to engage those skills are what lead to an enjoyable life. There are many stories and accounts about the winners of lotteries who are jubilant when they win, but whose lives descend into a nightmare after acquiring that unearned money. No challenge, no skill. The lottery looks like the answer to people because they associate money with pleasure. But the true enjoyment of money comes in part from the earning of it, which involves skill and challenge. Watching television is usually done for pleasure. That's why so few people can remember, or make use of, any of the 30 hours of television they have watched in the past week. In watching television, there is no combination of skill and challenge. Contrast that dull pleasure hangover we get from watching television with what happens when we spend the same amount of time preparing for a big Thanksgiving dinner for friends and relatives. In looking back, we remember quite vividly the entire Thanksgiving endeavor. One of the most inspirational people I know of is Martha Stewart. She personifies mastery of the concept of enjoyment. Her magazines and videotapes celebrate cooking, gardening, and home entertainment skills. Her own contagious enthusiasm for the things she enjoys and teaches others makes her, in my opinion, one of today's true heroes of optimism. If you're feeling like you have forgotten how to enjoy your own home, yard, and kitchen, buy one of her videotapes and allow her to inspire you. You can increase your own self-motivation by learning to be more aware of the profound difference between enjoyment and mere pleasure. 88 Keep walking. Ever since I was a child, I had a recurring dream that I began each day facing a mattress. The more I pushed into this mattress before my day began, the more the indentation went in, and the more saved up the sprung energy of the mattress got. The more the mattress was indented with my pushing at the start of the day, the higher it would spring up when I lay down on it to sleep at night. I would lie down on this mattress at night and see how high my dreams would fly me. How high I flew would always depend on the indentations I gave the mattress during the day. The impressions I gave it. How impressive I was. The difference I made. So then, after thinking about that dream the other day, I decided to step up my walking. I decided that the recurring dream was the way my subconscious chose to tell me something vital. Something about the difference walking made. Something about oxygen being pushed into my system. Walking would be an action I could take while wide awake. Walking would drive more oxygen into my lungs. I would become more like the great football coach Amos Alonzo Stagg, who lived to be 103 years old. Amos Alonzo Stagg was asked how he lived to be so old. The average life expectancy during his lifetime was 65, and he said, "I have, for the greater part of my life, indulged in running and other vigorous exercise that forced large amounts of oxygen into my body. I increased my walking just to see what would happen if my lungs became my mattress. I began to get happier. I began to enjoy life more. I began to be more motivated. As I walked, I wondered, what if the spirit lives as an aura around us? What if the spirit were a cloud of energy that exists around and outside our bodies, ready at all times to be breathed in? Drawn right into the soul? What if when you breathed deeply, you pulled in your own spirit? And you received energy for action, energy for an explosive takedown of one of your out-of-control problems? What if the solution to problems outside you was inside you? Deepak Chopra quotes an ancient anonymous Indian sage as identifying humanity's near-fatal superstition: you believe that you live in the universe when in reality the universe lives in you. Many modern scientific books are now referring to the human brain as the 3-pound universe. When the body moves, so does the mind. So does that inner world. When you're walking, you are organizing your mind whether you want to be or not. Soon we realize that the mind and the body are connected. When the Greeks said the secret to a happy life was a sound mind in a sound body, they were onto a powerful truth. I try to talk myself out of that truth many times a week. I'm too tired to exercise. I have an injury. I haven't had enough sleep. I should listen to my body. I would be shortchanging my children of the important time they need with me if I selfishly went out for my long walk. But I am always better off if I choose the walk. I am even better at relating to my children, because walking takes me to the soul. That's why I can't leave it out. I can't pretend it has nothing to do with this subject, because it's how I pull the truth to me. I pull the globe around toward me under my feet by walking. As the world turns, the lies leak out of my mind, into space. As the body becomes sound, so does the mind. It's true. And the songs in my head keep the rhythm of the walk going. Fats Domino. Ricky Nelson. 10 years after. I'm walkin'. Yes indeed. I'm goin' home. There is something about walking that combines opposites. Opposites, activity and relaxation. This very paradox is what creates whole brain thinking. Opposites, out in the world and solitude. Alone, but out there walking. This combining of opposites activates the harmony I need between the right and left brain, between the adult and the child, between the higher self and the animal. Great solutions appear. Truth becomes beauty. You have your own walking available to you, too. Yes, indeed. It might be dancing or swimming or running or racquetball or boxing or aerobics, but it's all the same thing. It's all a way of moving the body around like a merry plaything and oxygenating the spirit in the process. 89 Read more mysteries. My great friend and editor Kathy Imers, to whom I first dedicated this book, and later married, has always been a devoted reader of mystery novels. When I first met her, I thought, how curious that someone so intelligent would be reading mystery novels all the time. It was especially interesting to me because Kathy is one of the most literate people I'd ever met, a quick thinker and a skilled professional writer and editor. Her editing of my books had been the one thing, in my opinion, that gave them the sparkle that people said they enjoyed. In my own ignorance, I assumed mystery novels were pretty light fare. Hardly a challenge to the human mind. Now I've begun to change my mind. Not only am I peeking into some of the mystery books she has recommended, I've enjoyed Agatha Christie and Colin Dexter, but I've begun to find out more about what good mystery does to the intellectual energy of the human mind. Kathy has one of the most creative and energetic problem-solving minds I've ever encountered. I constantly marvel at her mental energy and perception because it stays clear and sharp all day, and long into the night. I would often find my own mental acuity descending the evolutionary ladder as night approached, while hers stayed alive and creative. The person with the highest IQ ever measured, Marilyn Vos Savant, recommends mystery novels as brain builders. Not only is this exercise fun, but it's good for you, she says. I'm not talking about violent thrillers, or police procedural novels, but instead I'm directing you to those elegant, clue-filled, intelligent mysteries solved by drawing conclusions, not guns. Vos Savant sees the reading of mysteries as something that leads to a stronger intelligence. If you try to keep one step ahead of the detective in an Agatha Christie or a Josephine Tey or a P.D. James mystery novel, it will sharpen your intuition, she writes in Brain Building. The Sherlock Holmes stories by Arthur Conan Doyle never go out of favor, and rightly so. Holmes's methods are brain builders brought to life. When people think of personal transformation, they don't normally think they can strengthen their own intelligence. IQ is something our cultural attitudes have always said we're born with and stuck with. But Vos Savant, whose IQ was measured at 230, the average adult IQ is 100, believes strongly that the brain can be built as surely and as quickly as the muscles of the body. So the next time you feel like curling up with a good mystery, don't feel guilty or non-productive. It might be the most productive thing you've done all day. 90 Think your way up. In some of my seminars I like to draw a picture of a ladder on the board and call it the ladder of selves. On the very bottom I write the physical, in the middle I put the emotional, and at the top I place the mind. We can move up or down this ladder by the sheer force of will, although most people don't know they have that option. By traveling up the ladder, past the physical, through the emotional, and into your mind, you have the opportunity to be creative and thoughtful. You can see possibilities. Many of us, however, never get past the emotional section of the ladder. When we're stuck there, we begin thinking with our feelings instead of thinking with our minds. If you hurt my feelings, and I'm angry and resentful, I might give you a long and eloquent speech about what's wrong with you and how you operate. But, because I'm thinking with my feelings instead of my mind, I'm destroying something with my speech instead of creating an understanding. People do this without knowing it. They let their emotions speak for them, instead of their thoughts. So what you hear is fear, anger, sadness, or other emotions put to words, but never creating anything. If you can picture this ladder inside of you, and start to notice that you are letting your feelings do your thinking and speaking, you can move up. You can get creative and really think and then speak. As Emmett Fox says, love is always creative and fear is always destructive. Go ahead and feel your feelings. But when it's time to talk, let your mind into the conversation. Your mind is what motivates you to your highest performance, not your feelings. 91. Exploit your weakness. Make a list of your strengths and your weaknesses on separate pieces of paper. Place the list of strengths somewhere where you'll see it again, because it will always pick you up. Now look at your list of weaknesses and study them for a while. Stay with them until you feel no shame or guilt about them. Allow them to become interesting characteristics, instead of negative traits. Ask yourself how each characteristic could be useful to you. That's not what we usually ask about our weaknesses, but that's my whole point. When I was a boy, I remember watching a remarkable tap dancer by the name of Peg Leg Bates on the Ed Sullivan Show. Bates had lost his leg early in life, a circumstance that would lead most people to give up any dreams of becoming a professional dancer. But to Bates, losing a leg was not a weakness for long. He made it his strength. He put a tap at the bottom of his peg leg and developed an amazing syncopated tap dancing style. Obviously, he stood apart from other dancers in auditions, and it wasn't long before his weakness became his strength. Master fundraiser Michael Bassoff has dazzled the development world by turning unappreciated staff members into great fundraisers. He, too, likes people's weaknesses, because he knows that they can be turned into strengths. If there is a shy secretary in the development office he's working with, he turns that person into the staff's best listener. Soon donors can't wait to talk to that person because she listens so well and makes people feel so important. When Arnold Schwarzenegger became a professional actor, he had a weakness, his thick Austrian accent. It wasn't long, however, before Arnold incorporated his accent into the charm of his action hero personality on the screen, and a former weakness became a strength. His accent became an identifying part of his character, and people everywhere began imitating it. One of my weaknesses early in life was my difficulty in talking to people. I had no confidence in my ability to speak and converse, so I got in the habit of writing people letters and notes. After a while I got so practiced with it that I turned it into a strength. My letter writing and thank you notes have created many relationships for me that would not have been created if I'd just focused on my shyness as a weakness. I have 4 children, but I didn't begin having children until I was 35 years old. For a long time I saw myself as being older than normal to be a father. I worried about it. I wondered if my son or daughters would be uncomfortable with a father so old. And then I realized that this didn't have to be a weakness. I thought about who I was when I was 25, and what a difficult time I would have had being a good father back then. Soon I took this weakness to be a great strength. Then one day while watching The Little Mermaid with my kids, I saw myself as the father in that movie, vigorous, strong, and wise, with flowing white hair. It was the perfect image. I now see my age as a major strength in raising my kids. The only weakness was in the way I was looking at it. There isn't anything on your weakness list that can't be a strength for you if you think about it long enough. The problem is, our weaknesses embarrass us. But embarrassment is not real thinking. Once we really start thinking about our weaknesses, they can become strengths, and creative possibilities emerge. 92. Try becoming the problem. Whatever type of problem you are facing, the most self-motivational exercise I know of is to immediately say to yourself, I am the problem. Because once you see yourself as the problem, you can see yourself as the solution. This insight was dramatically described by James Belasco in Flight of the Buffalo. This is the insight I realized early and return to often, he wrote. In most situations, I am the problem. My mentalities, my pictures, my expectations, form the biggest obstacle to my success. By seeing ourselves as victims of our problems, we lose the power to solve them. We shut down creativity when we declare the source of the trouble to be outside of us. However, once we say, I am the problem, there is great power that shifts from the outside to the inside. Now we can become the solution. You can use this process the same way a detective uses a premise to clarify the crime scene. If the detective says, "What if there were two murderers, not one?" she can then think in a way that reveals new possibilities. She doesn't have to prove that there were two murderers in order to think the problem through as if there were. The same is true when you become willing always to see yourself as the problem. It is simply a way to think. Unfortunately, our society today is in the habit of thinking the opposite of "I am the problem." Time magazine even ran a cover story called "A Nation of Finger Pointers," that made a powerful and persuasive case for the fact that we have become a nation of victims who see the American dream not as striving fulfilled, but as unachieved entitlement. In the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, Nathaniel Branden writes, "To feel competent to live and worthy of happiness, I need to experience a sense of control over my existence. This requires that I be willing to take responsibility for my actions and the attainment of my goals. This means that I take responsibility for my life and my well-being." Before I had realized the full power of a self-motivated life, I spent a lot of years pointing fingers. If I didn't have enough money, it was somebody else's fault. Even my perceived personality flaws were somebody else's fault. I was never taught that. I would shout in exasperation. "No one showed me early in life how to be self-sufficient," was a complaint I voiced often. But I was avoiding a basic truth: I was the problem. The reason I fought so hard to avoid that truth was that I never realized it contained good news. I thought it looked entirely shameful and negative. But once I discovered that accepting responsibility for the problem also gave me new power for solving it, I became free. 93. Enlarge your objective. Here is another self-motivator that also must be used as an intellectual tool only. Take a certain goal of yours and double it, or triple it, or multiply it by 10. And then ask yourself, quite seriously, what you would have to do to achieve that new goal. I used this game recently with a friend who holds a position in sales. He came to see me because he was selling $100,000 worth of product each month, the most on his team, and wanted to somehow get to $140,000. I asked him to tell me what it would take for him to sell $200,000 worth of equipment each month. $200,000, he shouted. That's impossible. I'm leading the team already with $100,000, and nobody thought that could be done. What would you have to do? I persisted. No, he said. You don't understand. I want to hit $140,000 a month, and even that is so hard I don't know how I'll do it. I finally told him the theory behind this game. If you seriously look at an outrageous goal, such as $200,000, it will open things up for you creatively that wouldn't have opened up if you stayed looking at $140,000. He nodded slowly and reluctantly agreed to play along for a while. Okay, he said. But remember, we're talking about something that's impossible. Fine, I said. But if your life depended on hitting $200,000 next month, what exactly would you do? He laughed and then started listing things as I wrote them down on a flip pad. After he got through the ridiculous ideas, like stealing other people's accounts and cooking the books, he began to think of more ideas. At first it was hard. I'd have to be 2 places at once, he said. I'd have to make twice as many presentations as I'm making. I'd have to present to 2 clients at once. Then it hit him. All of a sudden he got the idea that he might be able to stage a large presentation of his product with a number of clients in the room at one time. I could rent a room at a hotel and have 20 people in for coffee and donuts, and I could make a big deal out of it, he said. A number of other ideas came to him: ways to combine his cold calling with his travel time, ways to utilize email as a sales tool, how to use the administrative staff better, and ways to expand his contracts so that they would cover longer periods of time for a higher original fee, but at a lower overall rate. Idea after idea came to him while I wrote furiously on the pad. All of the ideas were a result of his thinking big. How would I sell $200,000 if I absolutely had to? He surpassed his goal of $140,000 the very next month. I've often used this method for self-motivation with myself. If I have a goal of signing 2 seminar contracts in the next 3 weeks, I'll often get out a pad of paper and ask, how would I get 10 contracts signed in 3 weeks? Inflating my goal puts me at a different level of thinking, and because I'm solving the problem of 10, I always get at least 2. If you want to really get some fresh motivational ideas, try expanding your goal. Blow it up until it scares you. Then proceed in your thinking as if it's a must that you achieve it. Remember that this is just a self-contained game, not a promise to anyone else. But it's a game that's fun to play because it works. 94. Give yourself flying lessons. We need heroes in our lives. They are not a sign of weakness, they are a source of strength. Without heroes, said Bernard Malamud, we are all plain people and we don't know how far we can go. Heroes show us what's possible for a human being to accomplish. Therefore, heroes are very useful to anyone who is in the process of finally understanding self-motivation. But unless we consciously select our heroes in order to use them as inspiration, we simply end up envying great people instead of emulating them. When used properly, a hero can be an enriching source of energy and inspiration. You don't have to have just one hero, either. Choose a number of them. Put their pictures up. Become an expert on their lives. Collect books about them. My youngest sister, Cindy, as a shy little girl, always admired Amelia Earhart. Not long ago, after she had reached her 30s, she revealed to me that she had been taking flying lessons. I was stunned. A few weeks after that, the family went out to a little airport outside of town to watch her fly her first solo. I was so scared, said Cindy, that my mouth and throat went completely dry. Flying has nothing to do with what Cindy does for a living. She just took lessons and learned to pilot a plane because of the impression that her hero, Amelia Earhart, made on her as a little girl. We grow into that which we admire, said Emmett Fox. Before he became a famous author, Napoleon Hill was struggling as a writer and speaker. He had a friend whose restaurant business was not doing well, and Hill offered to give free motivational speeches at the restaurant one night a week to help his friend increase his business. The speeches helped his friend a little, but they helped Hill a lot. He began to gain a large following. When I read about that part of Hill's life, it gave me an idea. At the time I wanted to be a full-time speaker and I didn't know where to begin. I'd done a few seminars and talks here and there, but there was no pattern or purposeful direction to it. I decided to emulate Hill. I began putting on a free, open to the public workshop every Thursday night at the company where I was working as a marketing director. At first, the workshops were not well attended. I had to spend part of the week begging people to come. Once the audience was 2 people. But week by week the workshop's reputation grew and my own experience grew along with it. Soon we had large audiences waiting to get in on Thursday nights, and I credit that little free workshop with putting me into full-time public speaking. Was it an original idea? No, I stole it. I copied a hero of mine. But our awareness of the choice involving heroes is vital for self-creation. We can envy them or we can emulate them. The best use of heroes is not to just be in awe of them, but to learn something from them. To let their lives inspire us. They are only people like we are. What distinguishes them from us is the great levels they've reached in self-motivation. To passively adore them is to insult our own potential. Instead of looking up to our heroes, it is much more beneficial to look into them. 95. Hold your vision accountable. It's not what a vision is, says Robert Fritz, it's what a vision does. What does your vision do? Does it give you energy? Does it make you smile? Does it get you up in the morning? When you're tired, does it take you that extra mile? A vision should be judged by these criteria, the criteria of power and effectiveness. What does it do? Robert Fritz is widely quoted in Peter Sench's business masterpiece, The Fifth Discipline. Fritz is a former musician who has taken the basic principles of creativity in music composition and applied them to creating successful professional lives. Life gets good, he argues, when we get clear on what we want to create. Most people spend most of their waking hours trying to make problems go away. This lifelong crusade to solve one's problems is a negative and reactive existence. It sells us short and leaves us at the end of life, or at the end of the day, with, at best, the double negative feeling of fewer problems. There is a profound difference between problem solving and creating, Fritz points out in The Path of Least Resistance. Problem solving is taking action to have something go away the problem. Creating is taking action to have something come into being the creation. Most of us have been raised in a tradition of problem solving and have little real exposure to the creative process. Step 1 in the creative process is having a vision of what you want to create. Without this vision, there is no way to create. Without this vision, you are only problem eliminating, which is a double negative. It's impossible to feel positive about a life based on a double negative. So the way to alter your thinking is to notice when you're drifting into, what do I want to get rid of, and mentally replace that thinking with, what do I want to bring into being. When Fritz says that we have been raised in a tradition of problem solving, he is almost understating it. We are programmed and wired to think that way every day. Notice the thinking of people as they approach a challenge, even a challenge as small as an upcoming meeting with other people. Here's what I hope doesn't happen, one will say. Well, here's how you can avoid that, someone else will helpfully say. The only problem we have is this, a third person will say, attempting to make the meeting seem less frightening. Notice that nowhere was there the question, what would we like to bring into being as a result of this meeting? Whether the situation is as small as a meeting or as large as your whole life, the most useful question you can ask yourself is, what do I want to bring into being? It's a beautiful question, because it makes no reference to problems or obstacles. It implies pure creativity. It puts you back on the positive side of life. My friend Steve Hardison made an observation about self-motivation that I have always remembered and agreed with. It's just one thought, he said. Motivational teachers repeat it many different ways, but it's just one thought, it's a binary system. Are you on or are you off? Are you positive or are you negative? Are you creating or are you reacting? Are you on or are you off? Are you life or are you death? Are you day or are you night? Are you in or are you out? Is you is or is you ain't? And there's nothing more motivational to flip your binary switch to on than a clear vision of what it is that you really want. What do you want to bring into being? It doesn't matter what that vision is or how often it changes. It only matters what that vision does. If your vision isn't getting you up in the morning, then make up another one. Keep at it until you develop a vision that's so colorful and clear that it puts you in action just to think about it. 96. Build your power base. Knowledge is power. What you know is your power base. It's the battery you run on. You need to charge it constantly and consciously. Who do you want to be in charge of what you know? News directors? Radio disc jockeys? The office gossip? Tabloid newspaper editors? A pessimistic family member? Unless we consciously decide to build our own knowledge base, with a sense of direction to it, then we will be programmed, totally, by random input. Feeling miserable and alienated from life is caused by not being in control of what we know. Misery and alienation are not laid upon us by fate, wrote Colin Wilson. They are due to the failure of the ego to accept its role as the controller of consciousness. All our experiences of happiness and intensity force the same conviction upon us, for they involve a sense of mastery. You can be the master of your own fate. You can make choices all day long about what you are going to learn and what you are not going to learn. What are you reading over there, someone may ask you. Oh, it's just something I found in the trash, you might say. And it might seem harmless enough to read something you found in the wastebasket because there was nothing else nearby, but whole lives are shaped that way. The computer term GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, is even truer for the human biocomputer than it is for mechanical computers. Take control of what you know. The more you know about what motivates you, the easier it is to motivate yourself. The more you know about the human brain, the less trouble you have operating it. Knowledge is power. Respect yours and build on it. 97. Connect truth to beauty. I hate reading motivational material that thunders at me about the importance of integrity and honesty for their own sake. Somehow, that always seems to turn me off, because the writers come off like angry preachers and teachers. Hardly inspiring. I'm always inspired better by things that are made to look interesting and fun. I'm always taken in by a promise of life being more beautiful and rarely taken in by a promise of a life being more righteous and proper. To me, the best case to make for honesty is how beautiful it is, how clean and clear it makes the journey from current reality to the dream. When people know exactly where they are, they can go somewhere from there. But being lost is a function of dishonesty. And when we're lost, or dishonest, anywhere we go from there is wrong. When we start with a false reading, there's no direction home. Like Bob Dylan's Rolling Stone, we don't know who we are. We feel, at the core, like a complete unknown. Truth, on the other hand, is clear, complete, and compellingly vivid. It is solid and strong, so it can hold us steady as we climb. Truth, said poet John Keats, is beauty. The more honest we are with others and ourselves about current reality, the more energy and focus we gather. We don't have to keep track of what we told one person or what we told another. One of the best and most positive explanations of the beauty of personal integrity was expressed by Nathaniel Branden in The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. Branden, unlike most writers on the subject, sees truth and integrity as a positive part of the process of self-esteem. His point is not that we owe it to other people's sense of morality to be honest, but that we owe it to ourselves. One of the great self-deceptions, said Branden, is to tell oneself, only I will know. Only I will know that I am a liar, only I will know that I deal unethically with people who trust me, only I will know that I have no intention of honoring my promise. The implication is that my judgment is unimportant and that only the judgment of others counts. Branden's writing on personal integrity is inspiring because it's directed at creating a happier and stronger self, not at a universal appeal for morality. One of the ways we describe a work of art that is sloppy and unfinished is as a mess. The problem with lying, or lying by omission, is that it leaves everything so incomplete in a mess. Truth always completes the picture, any picture. And when a picture is complete, whole, and integrated, we see it as beautiful. I'll even hear about people, usually people who you can't believe, about anything described as a mess. And conversely, a person who you can always count on to be honest with you is often referred to as a beautiful person. Truth and beauty become impossible to separate. Truth leads you to a more confident level in your relationships with others and with yourself. It diminishes fear and increases your sense of personal mastery. Lies and half-truths will always weigh you down, whereas truth will clear up your thinking and give you the energy and clarity needed for self-motivation. 98. Read yourself a story. Abraham Lincoln used to drive his law partners to distraction. Every morning he would come into his office and read the daily newspaper aloud to himself. They would hear him in the next room reading in a booming voice. Why did Lincoln do his morning reading aloud? He had discovered that he remembered and retained twice as much when he read aloud than when he read silently. And what he did remember, he remembered for a much longer period of time. Perhaps it was because Lincoln was employing a second sense, the sense of hearing, and a second activity, the activity of speaking, which made his reading so memorable to him. Any time you have an opportunity to read something that is important to you, try reading it aloud and see if you don't make twice the impression on yourself. When you discover something you want to remember, and draw upon in the future, read it aloud. Steve Hardison, one of the most successful business consultants I have ever known, credits one origin of his success to when he was a struggling young man without money or a clue about where he wanted to go. Then one day he came across Napoleon Hill's enormous book, Law of Success, and read the entire volume aloud. My favorite piece of writing to read aloud is chapter 16 of Og Mandino's The Greatest Salesman in the World. Here's a part of it, which you may now read silently to yourself. However, if you want a real shot of adrenaline to your spirit, I recommend you mark this page, and when you're alone, read it aloud like Lincoln. I will act now. I will act now. I will act now. Henceforth, I will repeat these words again and again, each hour, each day, every day, until the words become a habit as my breathing and the actions which follow become as instinctive as the blinking of my eyelids. With these words I can condition my mind to perform every act necessary for my success. With these words I can condition my mind to meet every challenge. 99 Laugh for no reason. Become a performer. Be an actor and a singer. Act like you already feel like you want to feel. Don't wait until the feeling motivates you. It could be a long wait. American philosopher William James put it very clearly, we do not sing because we are happy, we are happy because we sing. Most of us believe an emotion, such as happiness, comes first. Then we do whatever we do, in reaction to that particular emotion. Not so, insisted James. The emotion arises simultaneously with the doing of the act. So if you want to be enthusiastic, you can get there by acting as if you were already enthusiastic. Sometimes it takes a minute. Sometimes it skips a beat. But it always works if you stay with it, no matter how ridiculous you feel doing it. Feel ridiculous. If you want to be happy, find the happiest song you know and sing it. It works. Not always in the first few moments, but if you keep at it, it works. Just fake it until you make it. Soon your happy singing will show you how much control you do have over your own emotions. Zen monks do a laughing meditation in which they all gather in a circle and get ready to laugh. At the stroke of a certain hour the teacher hits a gong, and all the monks begin to laugh. They have to laugh, whether or not they feel like it. But after a few moments the laughter becomes contagious. Soon all the monks are laughing genuinely and heartily. Children do this, too. They start giggling for no reason, often at the dinner table or some other forbidden setting, and the giggling itself makes them laugh. The truth is this, laughter itself can make you laugh. The secret of happiness is hidden inside that last sentence. But adults aren't always comfortable with this. Adults want kids to have reasons for laughing. As I used to drive my children long distances to visit relatives, I'd get most irritated when they began laughing and giggling in the back seat without reason. I developed a backstroke swing to curb the laughter. "Why are you laughing?" I would shout. "You have no reason to be laughing. This is a dangerous highway and I'm trying to drive here." But adults, like me, might want to get back that appreciation for joyful spontaneity. We might want to confront the question, what is the one thing that most makes me feel like singing? And then know the answer, singing. What most gets you in the mood to dance? Dancing. The next time you ask someone to dance, and they say, "I don't feel like dancing," you might reply, "That's because you're not dancing." 100 Walk with Love and Death. I Am a Coward. That was how the book began. It was a novel I was reading not long after I had graduated from high school, and those first words staggered me. I remember staring at those words, unable to continue reading. I was so stunned. Never has a book connected with me so quickly. For I was a coward, too. It's just that I never admitted it so openly as did the author of A Walk with Love and Death. The author was Hans Königsberger, and the book was a medieval love story later made into a movie by John Huston, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that there was another coward on the planet other than me. Even if he was fictional, the words were real enough for me. My self-image at the time I read that book was based on my fears and nothing else. In my mind, I was truly a coward. And if someone were to tell me I'd done something brave, I'd think they were wrong somehow. Or that they didn't know how easy that thing was. Where did this self-image come from? I don't blame my parents, because I believe we create our own pictures of ourselves, and I had a choice whether to stick with this self-image or not. After all, I could have done what Gordon Liddy did when he was a boy, upset that he was afraid of rats. He caught some, cooked them, and ate them. Upset that he was afraid of thunder and lightning, he strapped himself to the top of a large tree where he stayed for the duration during a major electrical storm. These kinds of things I did not do. Although I don't blame my parents, I can trace where I got the idea of my being a coward to their encouragement. My mother, too, was afraid of everything. She lived to the age of 66 without ever having made a left-hand turn in traffic, so afraid she was of oncoming traffic. She always knew